Experts explain Africa is splitting in two, and it will look like this. Up close, the process is even more shocking, with a massive crack stretching from Mozambique in the south to the Red Sea in the north. This gap keeps growing every year, tearing apart the land and destroying homes. Now, specialists believe the continent could split much sooner than we expect. Africa is breaking apart because of the Somali Plate movement. Think of it like a dramatic breakup happening with tectonic plates. On the east side, there's the Somali Plate. On the west, we have the Nubian Plate. And during this breakup, the Somali Plate just wants more space, so it's pulling away from the Nubian Plate. This movement is forming the East African Rift, a region where tectonic plates are splitting apart, magma keeps rising from deep below, and a bunch of active volcanoes are being born. So this place is hot, with daytime temperatures that can soar to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night they cool down to 95 degrees. Inside this hot zone, we have the Afar Triangle, also known as the Afar Depression, and its geology is fascinating, as the rifting process is causing valleys, faults, and deep cracks to form in this region. Take, for example, this massive 35-mile-long fissure in Ethiopia's desert. It's also so wide that a person can easily fit inside of it. But what's scary is this crack keeps getting bigger, growing about a half an inch every year. The Nubian and Somali plates moving apart could also lead to a new ocean forming in Africa. This type of process isn't something new. About 150 million years ago, when dinosaurs were still around, a similar tectonic shift created the Atlantic Ocean. The continents were once all clustered together, but when a rift formed in what was Pangaea, it started pulling them apart, splitting the east and west hemispheres. So, a similar thing is happening with this gap in Africa. At some point, experts say the waters of the Indian Ocean might flood the East African Rift Valley, eventually creating a sixth ocean. Now, it's a pity you won't be able to swim in its waters during your lifetime, though. According to geophysicist Ken McDonald, who specializes in tectonic faults, this dramatic rupture could happen in 1 to 5 million years. Trust me, that's considered fast in geologic terms, and way sooner than most experts thought. Now, even though you won't get to watch Africa breaking apart, people there will still see and feel the signs. They might experience intense volcanic eruptions and strong earthquakes as this process slowly unfolds. One example is related to that scary crack in Ethiopia's desert we mentioned earlier. The fissure was created in 2005, after the area was hit by 2 volcanic eruptions and 163 earthquakes, each with a magnitude greater than 3.9. A crack this deep and long on Earth usually takes centuries to form, but in this case, it unfolded in just a matter of days. That's how powerful this event is. In fact, this kind of intense seismic activity can speed up the African splitting process, and that's why it's so hard to predict the exact time frame for the event. What we know is that people are already calling this new land the Nubian continent. If the predictions are right, it will include Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and part of Ethiopia. That's exciting and concerning at the same time. As new coastlines emerge, countries will need to make major adjustments when it comes to infrastructure and land management. They might lose a lot of roads, houses, and other constructions currently located near or right in the East African Rift. In Kenya, for example, the fissures tore apart a busy road, and authorities desperately tried to fill the gap with rocks and cement. In another case, an old woman was sitting and eating with her family when her house suddenly split down the middle. Recently, earthquakes that happened near Ethiopia's Afar region demolished 37 schools and forced about 5,000 students to leave their classrooms. Unfortunately, stories like this could become more common over the next few years. But there is a positive side to all this. Countries located in the middle of Africa, like Zambia and Uganda, could gain coastlines, and that might be great for them. Having a coast means they would get access to new trade routes, opening fresh economic opportunities. Plus, think about the tourism boom. With all those newly formed paradisical beaches, these countries could become the next big gateway spot for travelers. The local ecosystem in this newly created ocean will change as well, and new marine species may emerge. So let's look. This is the path where the rift is most advanced right now. I mean, we expect this is where Africa will eventually get separated. But things could get a little more complicated. Some time ago, Michael Daly, a geologist at the University of Oxford, suggested that this rift could extend further west. And some new evidence backs up his theory, pointing out that the crack could extend south through Botswana's heartland into South Africa, and west through Namibia, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. If these fractures widened into deep cracks, the ocean might come in and fill the gaps. Experts say Africa could split so much that it becomes an archipelago. But then again, we won't see that happening. It will take tens of millions of years for this to play out. We already know that Africa is at risk of breaking into a bunch of huge islands, or small continents. The news isn't great for Madagascar either, as the world's fourth largest island could end up being split in half. But can the opposite process happen? I mean, can new land appear as the Nubian and Somali plates move apart? Well, as these tectonic plates get away from each other, the magma from the Earth's mantle might rise to the surface, and when it cools, it solidifies into new land. That's how other places in the world emerged, like Iceland and the Azores. So, yeah, the same process could happen in the East African Rift, and over the long term, it is possible that the rift could create new islands. For now, all we can say is that the geology of the Afar Depression is unique. It is the most active rift system on our planet. And when I say rift system, I mean a zone where tectonic plates are pulling apart. This region brings together all kinds of events, from faults in the Earth's crust to volcanic zones to the potential formation of a sixth ocean. For experts, it's like studying the evolution of rifts up close. And since it is such an active volcanic area, it also has enormous potential for tapping into geothermal energy, that is, using heat from inside the Earth to generate electricity. 2 geothermal power plants are already producing energy in Ethiopia, one in the Ethiopian Rift Valley and the other in the Afar. Now, geologists are exploring new potential spots. When we look at that deep crack in the ground, we know it's caused by tectonic plate movement. There's no mystery there. But what we still don't fully understand is why the cracks happen exactly where they do. For example, a crack that opened up in Botswana appeared after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake back in 2017. But the epicenter wasn't in the rift zone, where the plates are moving like we would expect. Instead, it was farther south. Since it's unusual for a rift to happen without volcanic activity, this fact really challenges our traditional ideas of how continents divide. Figuring out why these cracks appear in specific spots is still a missing piece of the puzzle for experts trying to explain how Africa is splitting. Hopefully, we get some answers before the continent turns into a massive archipelago. Do you know how many continents there are on Earth? That's an easy one, 7. But wait a second, aren't Europe and Asia one large continent, Eurasia? It looks so when you look at the world map. Well, scientists think differently. They don't just look at bodies of land sticking out of the sea. Geoscientists study the types of rock that continents are made from. When you see the world from their perspective, the number of continents actually increases. Yes, they are not a myth. Lost continents exist, or at least they used to. They are hiding under other land masses. Peekaboo! Researchers have recently discovered one continent just like that. It's called Greater Adria. Sound familiar? Yes, it has something to do with the Adriatic Sea. This lost continent is completely buried under Europe. It collided with Europe and started to sink under it a long time ago. Today, it lies beneath Italy, Greece, and the Baltics. Its size and even shape match that of Greenland, the world's largest island. But how did geoscientists find Greater Adria? It's no longer visible, but it left some clues. Parts of it were embedded in the Alps. Other chunks were incorporated into present-day Italy and Croatia, on the other side of the Adriatic Sea. Limestone rocks from the former continent started to change once they were under the European landmass. Tremendous heat and pressure spread over tens of millions of years changed their structure. Out goes the limestone, in comes the marble. All the Greek and Roman temples you admired on your summer vacation were constructed using this marble. It was sort of a going-away gift from a long-lost continent. Greater Adria camouflaged itself well for thousands of years, but other lost continents were hiding in plain sight. Have you heard of Earth's eighth continent, Zealandia? Probably not, because it sits under the surface of the Pacific Ocean. 95% of Zealandia is now underwater. Can you guess where exactly? Its name is a good hint – under New Zealand. If you open Google Maps, you can see its outline. Look for a lighter shade of blue in the ocean. It should stretch from New Caledonia to New Zealand. This bump in the ocean floor used to be above sea level. It was about 2/3 of Australia and more than twice the landmass of Greater Adria in size. We can spot Zealandia today because it hasn't sunk too low, and that's the best way to discover other lost continents. Imagine the Earth without the oceans. The bottom of the sea isn't flat. There are mountains and trenches. You could put Mount Everest in the deepest of them, and there would still be 7,000 feet between it and sea level. This trench got so deep because of a geological process called subduction. The Pacific Plate got under the Philippine Plate. Earth's crust is made out of those plates that float in a sea of molten rock. Then they bump into each other, one goes down while the other one rises. That's how Greater Adria ended up under the European continent. Our planet is constantly on the go. We don't notice this process because it happens deep beneath our feet. 120 million years ago, Australia and Antarctica were a single piece of land. Yep, the coldest and one of the hottest places on Earth were once the same territory. Antarctica said goodbye to Australia, but it didn't leave empty-handed. Today, there is an oceanic plateau in the Indian Ocean. The word plateau comes from French, and it means elevated flatland. And the name of this land sounds like the title of a Hollywood movie, Broken Ridge. Long ago, it was connected to another lost continent. Scientists believe that it made a land bridge between India and Antarctica. What was this land like? The answer possibly lies in a tiny archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean. These islands are all that is left of an ancient landmass. They have a cold climate. The islands feature glaciers because they're so close to Antarctica. But in the past, the climate must have been temperate with plenty of rainfall. The animals and plants would have been similar to those that we find in tropical regions today. The lost continent's landscape probably resembled that of New Zealand. Now, while we're in the area, can you guess which continent the island state of Madagascar once belonged to? If you guessed Africa, sorry, you were wrong. Hey, don't feel bad. Look up and to the right of the map. The correct answer is India. Some 120 million years ago, I wasn't around then, India separated from the African continent and went northeast. Madagascar wasn't quick enough and ended up as an island off the southeast coast of Africa. But there is evidence of an even greater landmass, the lost continent of Mauritius. Scientists found traces of the ancient landmass under the island of Mauritius. Today, it's a tourist hotspot, but millions of years ago, it was a real hotspot, volcanoes and all. That's how scientists were able to retrace the steps of Mauritius. They found a mineral that exists in rocks which lava spews out after an eruption. The long-lost land once covered the area from Mauritius to the west coast of India. Imagine if that land existed today. It would form a great mix of Indian and African cultures. The local dishes would definitely be spicy. Now, speaking of spicy, have you had Indonesian food recently? Just 50,000 years ago, Southeast Asia looked much different. There was no Sumatra, Borneo, Java, or even Australia. Just Sunda and Sahul, two continental masses that were divided by a deep water trench. You had the extension of mainland Southeast Asia on one side and the Greater Australia on the other. Back then, Bali stood at the southernmost tip of Asia. Biologists were among the first scientists to notice the split. Species develop differently on Sunda and Sahul. That's why Australia has unique animals, such as the kangaroo, wombat, and platypus. And did you know that a giant kangaroo once roamed the island of New Guinea? That's because, up until the end of the last age, there was a land bridge to Australia. Today, the two islands are separated by the Torres Strait, but it's quite shallow, less than 65 feet. It's a reminder that this was once a single landmass called Sahul. Another ocean strait that isn't too deep separates Asia from North America. The Bering Strait sits today in the place of Beringia. This ancient landmass wasn't that big. It stretched 1,000 miles from north to south. That's just a third of the driving distance from Los Angeles to New York. Beringia was important for another reason. During the Ice Ages, it connected the whole world. Water levels were 300 feet lower than they are today. If they went even lower, you could walk from the Cape of Good Hope in Africa all the way to Cape Horn in South America. Talk about the ultimate backpacking route. Today, you can hop on an airplane and fly to pretty much any place on the globe. The world has never seemed smaller, has it? Well, it has. Some 300 to 200 million years ago, we were all one world, literally. Pangaea was a supercontinent that included all of the continents. Its name is in Greek, and it simply means all Earth. But Pangaea started to crack up. The biggest gap formed between the Americas on one side and Europe and Africa on the other. Seawater soon started pouring in, and that's how we got the Atlantic Ocean. This process is by no means over. While you are watching this video, North America is drifting further and further away from Europe at the rate of 1 inch per year. Doesn't seem much when compared to the average human lifespan, but in the end, all the continents will reconnect with each other, forming a supercontinent. And it wouldn't be the first time in Earth history that this happens. Honestly, I'm not going to wait around for that. So, there's a mysterious doorway in the middle of Antarctica. Some people think it's Bigfoot's vacation home, or a shuttlecraft from Star Trek, or maybe a door to Agartha, a mythical kingdom some people believe is located in the center of the Earth. Well, the scientists debunked all these poetic theories and explained that what looks like a mysterious doorway is located in an area of fast sea ice. It's offshore of the coast and is full of little islands with shallow water around them. When ice flows around hard rocks hidden underneath, it can create patterns that look odd but are totally normal. In this spot, the ice is thin, so the rocks underneath have a big effect on how the ice moves. The cold winds in Antarctica also shape the ice and snow and make it look like they're lines and shapes. So, the mysterious doorway is just a rocky ridge poking out because the ice has melted a little. The top of the doorway is the tip of the rock, and the sides are snowy trails left by strong winds blowing in the same direction. It's essentially an iceberg that got stranded and is melting in one place. One YouTuber found another out-of-place mysterious object more than 150 miles off the shore of Antarctica, a 400-foot-long ice ship. The internet went wild with theories like that the ship must have ended up there right from the Bermuda Triangle. But there was no scientific proof that it was a ship and not just a large chunk of ice. And once some other internet users revisited the place, they noticed the ice melted in the summer and the hypothetical ship was gone. Another mysterious Google Maps find in Antarctica was a pyramid. And before you make up an exciting theory about how the ancient Egyptians built a secret base here, I have to tell you it turned out to be just a mountain. It's part of the tallest mountain range in Antarctica that stretches for almost 250 miles. It's not the first pyramid on this continent, as explorers from the British Antarctic Expedition found another unusually shaped mountain and nicknamed it the Pyramid. But this one didn't even have a pyramid shape. Here's one Antarctic find that definitely won't disappoint you: a giant ice shelf that reminded scientists of the Grand Canyon. A special submarine robot named RAN covered over 600 miles under the thick ice and brought back some amazing footage of icy mountains, valleys, flat plateaus, and swirly patterns made entirely of ice. One of the strangest things Rand found was giant bowl-shaped holes, or scoops, in the ice. Sadly, scientists lost track of the robot. They think that curious Wendell seals may have accidentally bumped into Rand and caused it to get stuck. To save energy, Rand probably shut itself down, and the scientists couldn't find it again. But the team is hoping to build a new robot and continue exploring this icy canyon to see how the patterns under the ice might change over the years. Another huge Antarctic canyon was found thanks to bad weather. A team of sound experts had to pause their work at the Casey Research Station in a storm. Instead of waiting around, they decided to use the unexpected free time to map the seafloor near Adams Glacier. And that's how they found a canyon that is almost 7,000 feet deep, almost 30,000 feet wide, and stretches over 28 miles away from the glacier. During the mapping, they discovered just part of the canyon before they had to go back to the research station. But when bad weather came in again, the ship went back and mapped more of the canyon. They were working in waves up to 13 feet high and super powerful winds, but they managed to get about 15 hours of data to complete their map. On the way back to Australia, they stopped one last time, and now they've got a full picture of the canyon. Studying it is helping scientists learn more about the history of glaciers and the interaction between the Antarctic ice sheet and the ocean. Now, there's a frozen lake in Antarctica called Lake Enigma. For a long time, people thought the lake was completely frozen solid. But during one expedition, researchers found that under the thick ice, there was a layer of liquid water about 40 feet deep. To learn more, they drilled through the ice and sent down a camera to explore what was hiding in the lake's depths. The lake's water, which they think comes from the nearby amorphous glacier through a secret underground pathway, was filled with strange microbial life. These tiny microbes lived in mats that covered the lake bed. Some of the mats were thin and spiky, and others looked like crumpled carpets, or even small tree-like shapes that grew up to 16 inches. Many of the microbes could make their own food through photosynthesis, just like plants do, and it gave the lake a high amount of oxygen. One of the coolest discoveries was a type of microbe which usually lives in low-oxygen places. Lake Enigma might be similar to environments on icy moons like Europa or Enceladus, so it could mean that these moons also have hidden water under their ice and possibly microbial life too. One more mind-boggling discovery from Antarctica is tiny pieces of amber in mudstone, found here for the very first time. It took scientists years of studying incredibly well-preserved fossilized roots, pollen, and spores that they found back in 2017. Amber proves that resin-producing trees once grew in Antarctica, part of a lush rainforest that existed near the South Pole during the mid-Cretaceous period. Back then, disclaimer, I wasn't around then, the trees would have had to survive through months of darkness during the long Antarctic winters. Scientists believe they adapted by going dormant for a long time. The amber pieces the scientists found are tiny, but they are beautiful shades of yellow and orange with bumpy surfaces that show how the resin flowed out of the trees. This resin likely leaked out to protect the trees from insects. It was preserved because water quickly covered it and kept it safe from sunlight and air. A scientist was browsing through satellite images for brown trails of penguin waste and found 4 new colonies of emperor penguins at the base of the globe. These new colonies likely have been around for years, though 3 of them are rather small, with fewer than 1,000 breeding penguins each. One of the new colonies was found close to a place called the Lazarev Ice Shelf, where there used to be a larger penguin colony. They thought this colony went extinct in 2019, but it seems the penguins have just moved a bit because of changing sea ice conditions. So studying them can help us learn more about how emperor penguins adapt to changes in the environment. Now, there used to be a giant river system in Antarctica 40 million years ago. Researchers found proof of it after studying soft sediments and hard rocks from the frozen seabed. They looked at tiny bits of radioactive elements, like uranium and lead, and learned that the deeper dirt came from the time of dinosaurs. The dirt closer to the surface was younger and had an interesting pattern, like the kind you see in river deltas today, such as in the Mississippi River or Rio Grande. Scientists found tiny signs of life in the sand. The river that once flowed here started in the Trans-Antarctic Mountains and traveled 930 miles before it reached the sea. Researchers kept studying newer layers of dirt from about 20 million years ago. They hope this will help them predict what the Earth's weather patterns might be like in the future.
This invisible line divides the world into two parts, and most animals, fish, and birds, for some reason, can't cross it. The line is called the Wallace Line, and it runs between Australia and Asia. It has its name after Alfred Russel Wallace, a British scientist and explorer who discovered it in 1859. He traveled to Asia to explore a group of islands called the Malay Archipelago. As Wallace walked through the jungles, climbed hills, and sailed on boats, he noticed something like an invisible wall. On its west side, in places like Borneo and Sumatra, he saw animals you might find in Asia. There were big rhinos munching on leaves and monkeys swinging from tree to tree. The forests were full of life, with all kinds of animals you'd expect to see in a jungle. But in places like Sulawesi and Lombok, just across the imaginary line he came up with, Wallace found animals more like the ones in Australia and colorful birds like cockatoos. The behaviors of animals differ on different sides of the Wallace Line. Some creatures are great at traveling across tough barriers like water, but others are not. For example, bats can fly across open water, but they sometimes cross the Wallace Line. On the other hand, big animals that live on land like elephants usually stay on just one side of the line. Some birds are shy and like to stay hidden in thick bushes and trees to avoid predators. They wouldn't feel safe flying over wide stretches of water with no place to hide. Plants don't stick to the Wallace Line as strictly as animals do, because they spread in their own unique ways, like with seeds carried by the wind, water, or animals. One plant genus, the eucalyptus, mostly stays on the Australian side, but one eucalyptus tree has made its way to the Philippines on the Asian side. Underwater, the Wallace Line doesn't matter as much. The area between the Wallace Line and Australia is called the Coral Triangle, and it's bursting with life. Now, after more than 150 years, scientists think they finally have an explanation of the Wallace Line mystery. They believe it all started about 35 million years ago, when Australia broke away from Antarctica and slowly moved up to crash into Asia. When this happened, the crash created a chain of islands called the Malay Archipelago between Asia and Australia. This caused extreme changes in the weather, which made the area very different and affected which animals could live there. Researchers used a computer model that looked at how more than 20,000 species of animals from both sides of the Wallace Line would have behaved millions of years ago. When Australia started to drift away from Antarctica, it opened up a huge new era of deep ocean around Antarctica. This is where the biggest ocean current on Earth, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, began to flow. This swirling current made the planet's climate much cooler and completely changed how animals could live in different places. But not all animals were affected in the same way. Indonesia stayed warm and rainy, which was perfect for animals from Asia. These creatures could hop from island to island like stepping stones and make their way toward Australia. But animals from Australia had a harder time. Over millions of years, they had gotten used to living in cooler, drier places, so the tropical islands didn't suit them as well. Scientists believe if we can see how animals adapted to big changes in weather patterns millions of years ago, we might be able to predict how today's animals will cope with a similar situation. Other scientists after Wallace also tried to describe and explain the invisible natural border between Asia and Australia, and came up with their lines. The Weber Line, for example, is in a slightly different location than the Wallace Line, between the Oriental and the Australasian faunal regions within Wallacea. It's a group of mainly Indonesian islands that are separated by deep water straits from the Asian and Australian continental shelves. They were never connected to the big continents by land, So animals that could swim, fly, or float across the water made it to these islands. That's why the creatures living there are so unique and come from both Asia and Australia. Weber's line is where the balance tips. If you go one way, most of the animals are from Asia. If you go the other way, most of the animals are from Australia. Another important migration event in the history of our planet happened in the Americas. Around 30 million years ago, South America became a separate landmass as tectonic plates moved and pulled it away from Antarctica and Africa. Once it was on its own, the animals living there started to evolve in unique ways and turned into creatures you couldn't find anywhere else in the world. There were animals we still see today, like opossums, giant rodents like capybaras and chinchillas, armadillos, anteaters, and sloths. Some of the animals from those times are now extinct. There were giant ground sloths, bigger than cars, roaming around. There were glyptodonts, which were like giant armadillos with super tough, bony shells. There were also huge, scary birds that couldn't fly but could chase down their prey. Up in North America, animals could still travel to other parts of the world through the Bering Strait. So North America was full of different animals like deer, bison, horses, camels, and even mammoths and mastodons. They all lived alongside predators like big cats, wolves, and bears. About 3 million years ago, the continents of North and South America got connected by a strip of land called the Isthmus of Panama. It formed because the tectonic plates shifted again. Some major volcanic activity between 25 million years ago also contributed to the process. Animals started to move between North and South America, and this long process went down in history as the Great American Interchange. During the Ice Age, huge glaciers in the north grew and shrank over tens of thousands of years. When the glaciers were at their biggest, they held so much water that the sea levels dropped, and forests probably turned into wide grassy plains. So animals had the perfect conditions to cross over. Giant ground sloths were among the animals that went up north from South America, all the way to Alaska. One special kind even roamed the chilly tundras alongside woolly mammoths and caribou. Lots of North American predators decided to explore the South. There were cats like cougars, jaguars, and saber-toothed tigers with their giant teeth. Wolves, foxes, otters, raccoons, and bears also joined the migration. The short-faced bear could stand up to 13 feet tall and weigh as much as a small car. South America also had some funny-looking animals called sanus, or South American native ungulates. These were hoofed mammals that evolved into all kinds of weird shapes, while South America was isolated. Big animals from North America, for example, relatives of elephants with strange tusks, came to the south and became some of the largest creatures around. The ancestors of today's llamas settled in the Andes Mountains, and deer, tapirs, and peccaries thrived in the forests. Animals kept moving back and forth between the continents for thousands of years. But as the Ice Age ended, many of the bigger animals, like the giant ground sloths, couldn't adapt and disappeared. It seems North American animals were better at adapting to their new homes. You can find armadillos, porcupines, and opossums from South America in North America. But many of South America's most famous animals like jaguars, llamas, and spectacled bears left North America long ago. Scientists think South America's animals, after being isolated for millions of years, had a harder time dealing with new challenges when their ecosystems changed.
So it turns out that you can't drive between South America and North America, and there's a simple reason for that. There are no roads connecting the two continents, not even a rudimentary one. Technically, you could try your luck crossing on foot, but let me tell you, that would be a huge, huge mistake. The region that connects the two continents is called the Darién Gap, It stretches across southern Panama's Darién province and the northern part of Colombia. The only land route there is a 60-mile jungle trek. Crossing it can take anywhere from 3 to 10 days. It depends on weather conditions, how much you're carrying, and, honestly, just pure luck. Chance plays a big role here, because this isn't some chill, relaxing nature walk. It's a harsh, extreme environment, known for being completely isolated and one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Still, people seem to forget that and go there anyway. Every year, the number of people crossing just keeps growing. In 2014, fewer than 10,000 people crossed the gap. In 2023, that number increased to 520,000. Now, you might be wondering, what are so many people doing in the middle of the two American continents, risking all that danger? Well, that's because the Darién Gap has become a route for refugees migrating to North America. But to get there, they face all kinds of dangers, from insect bites and infections to serious fractures. We're talking about a no-man's land. Since there are no police stations, immigrants must also watch out for thieves. Along the way, they have no choice but to rely on and support each other. Most people start the crossing with at least a tent or tarp, rain boots, water, and some food. But these things get heavy fast, and people normally can't carry enough supplies for the entire journey. At some point, people start drinking river water to avoid dehydration. But the water's full of bacteria and dirt, so it causes intestinal issues. And if things get serious, there's no medical help there. To make this whole scenario even worse, the temperatures are brutal, often hitting over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a small subset of people who venture through the Darién Gap are hardcore adventurers and travelers looking for a survival experience in the jungle. But this region is no place for a relaxing vacation. A group of tourists who went there in 2023 ended up getting jungle rot, a fungus that affects the feet. The situation got so bad that a woman had to be carried out by the group on the last day because she couldn't walk. No matter how prepared people are for the Darién Gap, in the end, survival mostly comes down to luck. Out there, travelers won't find cities with solid infrastructure where they can crash at a hotel and gear up for the next day. In some spots, they might stumble across basic camps right in the jungle. These camps might offer wooden platforms for tents, bucket showers, toilets, and even plates of chicken and rice. But it all comes at a price. Wi-Fi, for example, might cost $2 an hour, and that seems like a pretty good deal, considering there's no cell phone service on the trail. They pretty much lose all contact with the outside world. Now picture a dense rainforest with steep, muddy terrain. The hiking trail is littered with boulders and tangled with vines, like nature's own tripwires. It climbs sharply over a mountain, becoming a serious challenge even for someone in good physical shape. The area also gets constant heavy rainfall, which can lead to landslides, flash flooding, and extremely muddy conditions. The situation gets so intense that even the t-shirts and faces of those who make the crossing end up covered in mud. They'll also have to cross a lot of fast-moving rivers. A Venezuelan dad who recently went through the area with his 2 kids said their sneakers ripped apart on the very first day. That's how powerful the rivers can be. And they're deep, too. Sometimes the water reaches all the way up to their shoulders. But the dangers in that area aren't recent. For centuries, the Darién Gap was thought to be impossible to cross. The first Europeans who ventured into Latin America saw it as kind of a jungle training school. They totally knew about its dangers, but still, many adventurers tried to make the crossing in the years that followed. In 1854, for example, an expedition disappeared for 49 days in the jungle, battling starvation and exhaustion. Then again, in 1870, a group of 100 men set out to cross it. Even though they were well prepared and carried cutting-edge equipment for the time, they still suffered tremendously during the journey. They had to rely on incredible resilience to survive the challenge. Over the years, people who ventured in often ended up passing away from hunger, thirst, and even drowning in rivers. They also face the risk of being attacked by dangerous animals like jaguars, white-lipped pecaries, and the fer-de-lance, a fast, irritable snake that is one of the most venomous out there. The area is also swarming with mosquitoes, which can spread serious health problems. Leaning against trees to rest can also be risky. This jungle is full of spiked chunga palm trees, which are covered in long black spines up to 8 inches long. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. Just brush against a chunga, and you could end up with infected wounds. And yet another danger is getting lost in the dense forest and never finding your way back to safety. These days, though, this risk is a lot lower. Some people have mentioned color-coded markers that help guide travelers and keep them from going the wrong way. If they see blue or green fabric tied to trees, it means keep walking. But if they spot red fabric, that's a sign they're going the wrong way and need to turn around quickly. Since there are so many dangers, why not just build a road through the Darién Gap? While it might seem like a good idea, building a road connecting Panama and Colombia isn't really that simple. The Darién Gap has a humid climate, tough terrain, and constant rainfall, which means any attempt to build a functional road would be highly challenging and super expensive. Even though there have been previous attempts to fill in the gap. See, there's a huge road system called the Pan-American Highway, which stretches all the way from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. Nowadays, this highway hits a roadblock right at the Darién Gap. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, as the original idea was for the road to go through there. Leaders from Latin American countries tried to make this plan happen in the 70s, and then again in the 90s. But a lot of people were against it, mainly because they wanted to protect the local communities and the rainforest. Since the Darién Gap is mostly untouched by humans, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's believed that 1 in 5 species are endemic to the region, meaning they only exist in that specific area, like the Darién pocket gopher and the slatty slender mouse opossum. A road would have really damaged the ecosystem in the area, so the plans were scrapped. Eventually, an alternative was created to travel by sea. At least 2 companies started a ferry service connecting the 2 countries. However, the business wasn't profitable, and they ended up shutting down. Not long ago, Panama decided to close the Darién Gap route. Now they're sealed off with barbed wire fencing. It might just be a matter of time before other routes are created. But if you are an adventurer looking to visit South America, it's probably not best to wait for that. Traveling by plane to Colombia will always be a much safer option.
Scientists discovered something Atlantis-like near Australia. There used to be an entire continent that's now underwater. Here's what happened to it. Around 70,000 years ago, during the last ice age, there was a huge landmass called Sahul. It was located in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. This ancient supercontinent connected what we now know as Australia, New Guinea, Tasmania, and the Aru Islands into one giant piece of land. Imagine lush tropical rainforests surrounded by beautiful mountains. Sahul's tallest mountains were in the New Guinea highlands, with peaks reaching over 13,000 feet. This beautiful place was home to a variety of unique animals, most of which were pouched creatures. But back then, they weren't just koalas and kangaroos. Sahul was filled with different types of grazers, burrowers, scavengers, and predators. It was home to a huge diprotodon, a powerful hunter Thiosolio, and a horrifying Megalania, a creature that's much larger than any living lizard today. It was a unique place because the rest of the world was filled with placental animals at the time, like wolves, elephants, and humans. In Sahul, the only normal mammals were bats and rodents. But not all its parts were the same. The Timor, Arafura, and Carpentaria regions were covered by hot savanna and dry forests. It looked kinda like modern Australia, hot air deserts with scrubland, steppe, and temperate forests along the eastern coast. Back then, people were migrating all across the world. They made an incredible journey from Southeast Asia to Sahul and first arrived here from 60 to 45,000 years ago. They mostly traveled by foot and crossed the sea using bamboo rafts and simple boats. They came there from an ancient landmass called Sunda, which includes parts of Southeast Asia. They traveled across a series of islands known as Wallachia and eventually spread across Sahul. And it wasn't a small journey. Sahul was huge, around 4.1 million square miles. That's bigger than the USA or Canada. It stretched from the equator to around the southern part of New Zealand. So they arrived in what is now Australia and became Australia's first people. Scientists think that Sahul had a population of 500,000. We've discovered cave paintings that date back around 40,000 years. It's a hunting scene depicting an anoa, or miniature buffalo, facing figures of humans and animals. Researchers are trying to figure out how these early settlers moved across Sahul and where we might find archaeological evidence of their journey. To do this, they created a landscape evolution model. The simulation showed how Sahul changed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago. It showed potential migration routes and archaeological sites. Humans likely traveled along coastlines and rivers. But how did Sahul get submerged off the coast of Australia, similar to the mythical Atlantis? During the last ice age, much of the Earth's water was locked up in large ice sheets and glaciers. The sea levels were much lower than they are today. After that, the global temperatures increased. The ice sheets melted and the sea levels rose, flooding the land bridges that once connected different parts of Sahul together. About 8,000 years ago, New Guinea separated from mainland Australia, and then, about 6,000 years ago, Tasmania did the same. We still can explore the underwater parts of Sahul thanks to new technology. Divers explore and collect samples directly from the ocean floor. Underwater drones can go to places that are too deep or dangerous for humans to explore. And with sonar mapping, scientists use sound waves to create maps of the ocean floor. It's like using an echo to see what's underwater. The sound waves bounce off the seabed and come back, helping us create a picture of what it looks like. Deep underwater, archaeologists have found stone tools and other artifacts. They also discovered fossils of animals like Diprotodon and Thylacoleo. By studying the underwater terrain of Sahul, they learned about the ancient rivers, lakes, and coastlines that existed during the Ice Age. But Sahul isn't the only underwater continent. Sahul isn't the only hidden gem of Southeast Asia. Take Sundaland, a place made up of Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and some other islands. This place was crazy huge during the Ice Age, but now almost fully underwater. Almost, but not entirely. The parts above the ocean are teeming with life. If you like birds, check this place out. It has almost a fifth of the world's bird species. You can spot colorful birds like the Java hawk eagle and the Bali starling among the lush forests. It's also a home to a fourth of Earth's fish species. Sundaland's waters are a haven for marine life, even the most exotic animals like the Asian arowanas. It's also a treasure trove of flowers. That's where you can find Rafflesia and Titan aurum, the world's largest flowers. This makes it very similar to Zealandia. Zealandia is a long, narrow piece of land about half the size of Australia. It broke from Antarctica about 100 million years ago. Just like Sundaland, it isn't fully underwater. 7% of it stayed above sea level. This sticking out little piece is what we now call New Zealand, along with Stewart Island and some smaller islands. These pieces of Zealandia are lush and warm. They're packed with volcanoes, mountain ranges, beautiful natural geysers, and hot springs. Local people, Maori, use these hot springs for cooking. People place corn, eggs, and vegetables in baskets and lower them directly in the hot springs. Sometimes they cook food in a pit oven using heated rocks. Another hidden world is known as Argoland. This mysterious landmass was once part of Australia, back when dinosaurs chilled around. It drove scientists crazy for decades. They knew it existed because it left a huge stretch on the ancient seafloor, the Argo Abyssal Plain. About 155 million years ago, it broke off from Australia, saying bye-bye. The continent drifted somewhere north, and when it reached Southeast Asia, it just vanished. Scientists had no idea where it went, but recently they finally found its remains. Turns out, poor Argoland's lower parts started drowning into the Sunda Trench, a horrifyingly deep oceanic pit. The Earth's crust sunk into the mantle. Meanwhile, the upper parts of Argoland were pushed upward, grabbing the younger rocks on land. Because of this, Argoland broke apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. These pieces formed parts of Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, and other regions. The remains are buried under Indonesia and Myanmar. Imagine a colossal landmass the size of Greenland, Greater Adria. Its journey began about 240 million years ago when it broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana. It started moving north, and after 100 million years of enjoying the warm seas, it suddenly crashed into Europe and shattered into pieces. Most of these pieces went deep into the Earth's mantle, but some were scraped off and became part of mountain ranges like the Alps. Today, the remnants of Greater Adria are scattered across more than 30 countries, from Spain to Iran. That's why they're hard to look for. Seychelles was also once part of Gondwana. Yep, these idyllic islands are sitting atop of the ancient continent. We know a lot about it because of its fascinating granite outcrops. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener discovered continental drift, but no one believed him. These granite outcrops helped him prove that he's not crazy and that tectonic plates really are moving. The Seychelles broke off from India and Madagascar and eventually became a sad loner in the Indian Ocean. This probably happened because of some insanely active volcanoes in the Deccan Traps. But now the islands are home to unique species both on land and in the coral reefs nearby. Mauritius broke off from India after the dinosaur wiping. Along its journey, it stretched into a long ribbon-like shape and also broke into pieces. Now it's all scattered beneath the Indian Ocean. Scientists stumbled upon this lost land by studying tiny ancient crystals called zircons. These zircons are like time capsules. They date back an astonishing 660 million to 2 billion years. That's even older than Mauritius itself. These ancient crystals hinted that there's another Atlantis somewhere nearby. Turns out there are hidden continents all around the world, and maybe we'll discover more of them in the future. Frankenstein, unreasonably cold weather, and tons of lava. What do these things have in common? They all trace their origins back to Mount Tambora. This volcano in Indonesia had such a massive impact that the aftermath could be felt in Switzerland even a year later. And these spots are thousands of miles apart. Soon, we might be facing something similar again. Stick around because I'm about to reveal the exact spot where the next eruption is expected to happen in 2025. Back in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted with unprecedented force, sending a colossal cloud of fine particles into the atmosphere. This cloud reflected sunlight, leading to global cooling and even the year without a summer in 1816. Temperatures plummeted, crops failed, and families worldwide faced food shortages, compounded by various health issues. Fun fact: Frankenstein appeared because of abnormally cold weather in the summer of 1816. The author got stuck indoors in Switzerland and wrote this story to pass the time. But that is the only positive aftermath. In England and Ireland, people struggled to find food. The crops were too bad that year, and this year without summer cost them lives, all because of the eruption in Indonesia. While many other volcanoes have erupted since then, none have had consequences as dramatic as Tambora. However, climate professor Marcus Stoffel from the University of Geneva believes potential serious eruptions aren't just a matter of luck, it's only a matter of time. So it's up to us. We can sit back and wait for the inevitable, or we can start preparing today. This future eruption will happen in a world that's vastly different from the one in 1815. Not only is our planet more densely populated now, but we've also experienced irreversible changes that affect our daily lives. Now, if you think volcanoes are always the bad guys, think again. They've actually played a crucial role in shaping our planet. They help with land formation, atmospheric development, and climate modulation. Just look at Yellowstone, for example. When thick lava oozed to the surface, it spread across the landscape and transformed the area forever. When volcanoes blow their tops, they release a mix of lava, ash, and gases, including carbon dioxide. But don't worry, compared to the emissions from fossil fuels, the amount from volcanoes is pretty tiny. What scientists are really keeping an eye on is sulfur dioxide, because it can have a big impact on our climate. When a major volcanic eruption happens, it can send sulfur dioxide soaring into the stratosphere, which is about 7 miles up in the atmosphere. Once there, it transforms into tiny aerosol particles that scatter sunlight, helping to cool the planet. This cooling effect isn't immediate though. Those particles can hang around for a couple of years and even circulate all around the globe. Nowadays, we've got special equipment to monitor sulfur dioxide emissions from space. Take Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. During its eruption in 1991, it released around 15 million tons of sulfur dioxide. Now, while that's a lot, it wasn't quite as massive as the eruption of Tambora. Still, Pinatubo managed to lower global temperatures by about 0.5 degrees Celsius for several years. Tambora, on the other hand, dropped average global temperatures by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. I know what you might be thinking. That's not much, but trust me, it makes a difference. If the planet warms up by just 1 degree Fahrenheit, it could really mess with sea levels. Experts think we might see a rise of up to 8 inches by the end of this century. This could wipe out a lot of farmland and coastal habitats, which would be a huge blow to many communities. So maybe a volcano eruption that can cool off the planet is like a natural mechanism helping us out? Not exactly. While it does cool the planet off, don't get tricked into thinking it's the kind of coolness our planet needs. Such temperature shifts can severely mess up with the crops, like they did in 1816. There's also evidence that major eruptions can disrupt rainfall patterns, leading to drier conditions in monsoon regions across Africa and Asia. You see, the summer monsoon relies on the temperature difference between land and ocean, which can be altered by volcanic activity. Interestingly, a warmer climate may enhance the cooling effects of volcanic eruptions. Experts explain that the formation and movement of aerosol particles depend on climate conditions. As global temperatures rise, faster air circulation can lead to smaller aerosol particles, which are more effective at scattering sunlight and thereby intensifying the cooling effect. Oceans also contribute to this dynamic. A warming ocean surface creates a stratified layer, hindering the mixing of warm and cold water, which could mean that volcanic eruptions primarily cool the upper ocean layer and the atmosphere above it, according to Stoffel. Moreover, climate change may influence volcanic systems directly. The melting of ice can trigger more eruptions by reducing the pressure that allows magma to ascend more easily. Additionally, increased rainfall associated with climate change can seep into the ground and interact with magma, potentially sparking eruptions. While the prospect of a cooling period due to a volcanic eruption might seem beneficial amid climate change, scientists warn that the effects could be dire. The immediate consequences could be severe, particularly for the estimated 800 million individuals residing near active volcanoes. A major eruption could devastate entire cities. For example, Campi Flegrei, located near Naples, Italy, is showing signs of increased activity and threatens the lives of about 1 million people. Now, if you're from Oregon, beware, as experts say this state might experience volcano eruptions. Are you scared? Don't be. It's actually not as scary as it seems. Let me explain why. There are more than 80 volcanoes in Oregon, but we're not interested in a single one of them because it's an underwater volcano that is likely to erupt in 2025. Axial Seamount is the most active volcano in the Pacific Northwest, yet it remains largely unknown to the public due to its location approximately 300 miles offshore and nearly a mile beneath the ocean's surface. While its upcoming eruption is expected to pose no threat of a tsunami or significant land-based earthquakes because of its depth and distance from the Cascadia Fault, the data gathered from studying its eruptions can enhance our monitoring of potentially more hazardous volcanoes. Let's call it a friendly eruption, shall we? In reality, predicting eruptions is a complex endeavor. We often encounter alarming headlines, such as, "Yellowstone is about to erupt." Should we take these claims seriously? Not really. Yes, Yellowstone sits atop an active supervolcano that has experienced 3 major explosive eruptions in the past 2.1 million years. The last eruption occurred approximately 70,000 years ago, with the most significant explosion taking place around 631,000 years ago, forming the massive Yellowstone caldera. Naturally, many people are curious about whether Yellowstone will erupt again and when that might happen. Fortunately, scientists are employing new techniques to delve into these questions. A recent study suggests that Yellowstone is unlikely to experience another major eruption anytime soon. The reason is that the magma beneath the park is divided into a network of separate chambers. While there is a substantial amount of magma present, it's not sufficiently interconnected to support an eruption. Previous studies proposed that the existence of a massive layer of magma beneath Yellowstone, but these latest findings change that notion. To gain a clearer understanding of the subterranean dynamics, researchers utilized a technique called magnetotellurics, which employs Earth's natural electromagnetic fields rather than seismic waves. Since magma is a good conductor of electricity, this method is particularly effective for mapping molten rock and comprehending underground activity in volcanically active regions. By using magnetotellurics, scientists created a detailed map of the magma under Yellowstone, enabling them to make more informed predictions about future eruptions. But what will happen if an eruption similar to Mount Tambora occurs? By and large, there will be huge climate chaos. Yeah, the best scientists are looking for the solution should it really happen, but they don't have it yet. So technically, we're not ready for the second Mount Tambora. But for now, we're pretty much safe. No major eruptions are predicted. Whew! I guess it's no surprise that it's not that easy to just hop on a plane and literally fly to the South Pole, aka Antarctica. Sure, there are airports down there, but they're not really set up for commercial flights. So most people go to Punta Arenas International Airport in southern Patagonia, Chile, and then take a boat if they want to see some penguins. But not only is it hard to fly there, it's even harder to fly over there. When you're cruising at 30,000 feet, you probably don't think much about what's happening below. But it's pretty unusual for flights to go directly over the South Pole, and planes flying across Antarctica are quite rare too. Technically, it is possible. I've already mentioned that there are airports there. But even so, the infrastructure down there is still super limited. There simply aren't enough airports or refueling stations to support regular commercial flights, making it tricky to operate in such a remote area. Plus, there are only a handful of specialized cargo and transport flights that go in and out, and they exist to cater to those few folks who actually live in Antarctica. Then there's the weather that drives up the costs. The simplest example is that the pilots there need special training, which costs money, which is all because of the weather. Another hurdle is something called ETOPS. These rules dictate how far twin-engine planes can fly from an airport. Since there are so few airports in Antarctica, it's tough for pilots to stick to these regulations. Historically, ETOPS made it next to impossible to fly close to or over the South Pole, while flights over land have plenty of airports to choose from. Antarctica is a whole different ballgame. These days, some aircraft can fly up to 330 minutes or, in rare cases, even 370 minutes from an airport. But even with those extended limits, certain parts of the airspace above Antarctica are still off limits. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a huge deal. The most curious of you must have Googled that already and found out that there really are Antarctic airways. Please do not judge fast, and don't say I wasn't right saying how hard it was to fly to the South Pole. Let me break it down for you. Antarctic Airways advertise as the world's most exclusive transcontinental flight, but don't think you can just waltz in and book a ticket anytime. For starters, Antarctic Airways mostly operates flights to King George Island from December to March, so it's not all year round. But there are many more reasons why these flights are unique. If you dig into their website, you'll find you've got two choices: a full day in Antarctica or an overnight adventure. Prices kick off at $5,500 for a day trip and go up to $6,500 for an overnight stay. And if you're considering a private charter, get ready to shell out a pretty penny. It's rumored to start at around $125,000. Sure, that's a steep price compared to your average cruise ship crossing the Drake Passage, but here's the thing. It's about 20 times faster. A cruise ship takes 2 days from Chile, while Antarctic Airways gets you there in just 2 hours. Air travel to Antarctica is pretty limited, likely due to the high costs, limited seating, and the logistical challenges that come with flying to such a remote location. Plus, flights can often be delayed because of bad weather. Most travelers opt for a quick day trip or an overnight stay on King George Island, usually aboard smaller Beechcraft King Air 300 aircraft. The experience typically includes a stroll to a research station and a boat ride to see nearby penguin colonies, but that's just scratching the surface of what Antarctica has to offer. But once you're aboard Antarctic Airways, you'll see it's just like a regular flight on a smaller plane. You'll be served meals that have received some pretty good reviews. There are even photos floating around online showcasing the food, and honestly, it looks awesome. Those who've experienced it say it's luxurious yet unpretentious. You'll get a mix of meats and cheeses, plus treats like tiramisu, salmon salad, a single after-eight chocolate, and a selection of quality street candies. Today, everything may seem cool and safe, but back in the day, there were some pretty tragic events. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 tragically collided with Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. Unfortunately, all 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard lost their lives that day. Since 1977, Air New Zealand had been running regular sightseeing flights over Antarctica. This particular flight took off from Auckland Airport in the morning, with plans to spend several hours exploring the stunning Antarctic landscape before heading back to Auckland via Christchurch that evening. Initially, the inquiry into the incident pointed the finger at pilot error. However, growing public concern led to the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry for a deeper investigation. The commission found that the crash had been primarily due to a change in the flight path coordinates made the night before, which the flight crew hadn't been informed about. As a result, instead of being guided by the computer down McMurdo Sound, as they were led to believe, the aircraft was mistakenly redirected toward Mount Erebus. In a way, this flight looks like modern one-day Antarctic tours. Flight 901 was marketed as a unique sightseeing adventure, complete with a knowledgeable Antarctic guide who highlighted various scenic spots and landmarks through the plane's public address system, while passengers enjoyed a low-altitude tour of McMurdo Sound. These flights operated as day trips, taking off from New Zealand and returning on the same day. The plane departed from Auckland International Airport at 8 a.m., aiming to land in Antarctica, with a scheduled return to Christchurch International Airport by 7 p.m. The total journey covered about 5,360 miles, including a 45-minute stop in Christchurch for refueling and crew changes before completing the final 464 miles back to Auckland, arriving at 9 p.m. Back in November 1979, tickets for these flights were priced at $359 per person, which is over $2,150 in today's money. Anyway, this tragedy isn't the reason why planes don't fly over the South Pole. The real culprits are weather, ETOPS regulations, and of course, penguins. Yep, those cool, friendly little creatures. Friendly, at least according to researchers. With no natural predators on land, all of them are in the water. They're not really afraid of people and actually seem to enjoy our company. The South Pole is completely uninhabited and packed with penguins, making it pretty tricky to build anything down there. By the way, the North Pole actually allows planes to fly over it. Not too long ago, there were direct flights from Copenhagen to both LA and Tokyo, operated by SAS, and they cruised right over the North Pole. Other airlines joined in too. For example, Emirates ran a flight from Dubai to LA that took the same route. The difference in air traffic between the two poles mainly comes down to where people live and how much land there is. Roughly 88 to 90% of the world's population hangs out in the Northern Hemisphere, while only about 10 to 12% call the Southern Hemisphere home. Most folks in the South are clustered around the equator in places like Indonesia, Central Africa, and Brazil. When it comes to flights heading to the South Pole, options are pretty limited. You mainly have routes connecting New Zealand and Australia, parts of southern South America, and a few spots in southern Africa, especially South Africa. There aren't really any direct flights over the South Pole, though some flights can get close to Antarctica. One possible route could connect Auckland, New Zealand to Cape Town, South Africa, but there aren't any scheduled flights for that right now. The few flights that came close to Antarctica are operated by Qantas and LATAM Airlines, linking Australia with Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile. In 2021, Qantas took a long detour over parts of Antarctica on a flight from Buenos Aires to Darwin, and in July 2023, they adjusted a route closer to the continent to dodge some fierce headwinds on a trip from Santiago to Sydney. There's a place on Earth so dangerous that even the most fearsome creatures of today wouldn't last a moment there. It used to exist in what we now call southeastern Morocco, the land called the Chem Beds. The story of this place stretches back to the Cretaceous period, about 100 million years ago. It might have looked like a beautiful place at first sight, a lush green forest, rivers glittering in the sun, until you meet some terrifying dinosaur. The lions or sharks of today are nothing compared to what the fossils show us. The Chem Beds were dominated by terrifying predators, and above them all, 3 of the largest predatory dinosaurs ever discovered. For example, Spinosaurus. This dinosaur was unlike anything you can imagine, a half reptile, half monster standing over 50 feet tall, bigger than a T-Rex. This hybrid with a crocodile-like snout and a sail on its back hunted the forests. But this dino could dive into the rivers, so not even waters were safe from it. It could catch huge fish, as if plucking them from the shallows. There was also Carcharodontosaurus, a carnivore with the name that literally means shark-toothed lizard. Its razor-sharp teeth could slice through flesh with terrifying ease. This monster stood almost as tall as a house and was faster, stronger, and more aggressive than nearly anything that had ever walked the earth. There was also Deltadromedas, a raptor-like dinosaur built for speed. It was a quick-moving ninja that stalked its prey with horrifying precision. Oh, and the skies were a fun place too, with all these pterosaur creatures flying around. These guys are often mistaken for flying dinosaurs, but they were actually a different kind, more like close cousins of dinosaurs. These majestic reptiles soared above the Chem Beds and had wingspans that could stretch up to 30 feet. The fingers were feathery, with a 4th finger kinda like bats. They could glide through the air so easily thanks to their super light skeleton. But it wasn't just the dinosaurs that made the Chem Beds so horrifying. The waters also hid their own dark secrets. They were home to giant, terrifying fish and crocodile-like creatures. Their jaws were strong enough to crush bone, and they were lurking beneath the surface, waiting for anything unlucky enough to stumble into their path. One of the river creatures was Sarcosuchus, also called the super croc. Being about 40 feet long, it could easily swallow an adult human. Or better yet, it could take on a full-grown dinosaur and win. Its jaws snapped with unimaginable force, and no creature, not even Spinosaurus, was safe from it. Coelacanths could also hang out in the rivers. It was a monstrous predator that could easily swallow a huge fish whole. They had these creepy, icky fins that moved in a way similar to how human arms and legs move. And they could also kind of raise their heads like humans because of a special joint in their skull. Ew. Fun fact, we thought these monsters had gone extinct 60 million years ago, together with dinosaurs. But recently, we rediscovered them living and thriving in the Indian Ocean. Turns out they were just hiding in the deep waters. They probably didn't even notice the dinosaur asteroid or humans at all. Yay? Don't worry, over millions of years, they became basically harmless. They got 4 to 5 times smaller, even though they still weigh about 200 pounds. Just imagine what they were like back in the day. Kem waters were also home to giant lungfish and other creepy aquatic creatures. So you couldn't even drink or take a swim safely without getting bitten by something. Whew, what a place. Even turtles there were the size of cars. Imagine trying to survive in a world where creatures like this are literally everywhere. And I mean everywhere. This place was unique not because huge beasts lived there, but because of the sheer number of predators. You might think, it shouldn't be that easy for all these predators to hang out in one place, right? And you're right. Seems like prey was scarce there. That's even more chilling. All the predators just wandered around, hunting whatever meager life remained. And if there's none, then fighting each other. For years, scientists have wondered why it was the case. Maybe that's just how life was back then. And all corners of Earth were crazy like that. Or is there something special about this place? Some even say that maybe it's just because we only found predators' fossils, while normal friendly animals have disappeared, and that the fossil record might be skewed. But who knows? And the environment itself was just as fascinating as the beasts who lived there, just a bit more friendly. It's hard to imagine, but back in the day, this desert was a green paradise, humid and full of rivers. The heat of the sun scorched the land. The climate was hot, so hot that even the poles were warm. The weather there was extreme. Dry seasons followed by intense storms, which shaped the land and life. The giant rivers carved their way through this landscape. They stretched from the Sahara, emptying into the ancient Tethys Ocean to the north. If you were there, you'd see vast, interconnected basins, and beyond them, the central Atlantic Ocean. The floodplain stretched out beneath a sweltering sky. The rivers were just as wild as local animals, flowing lazily one day, but raging like furious beasts the next. At first, these rivers were powerful, carving deep channels through the land and creating wide sandbanks. But over time, they slowed down, and the landscape changed into shallow ponds and salt-covered flats. As water gradually faded away, it left behind a patchwork of wetlands and slow-moving waters. Right now, the Chem Beds is a vast, rugged desert where time has stood still for millions of years. If you visited it, you'd see a giant escarpment, its rocky face winding along the border of Morocco and Algeria, bathed in the sun's harsh light. Beneath your feet would lie layers of fossilized history. That's one of the reasons why scientists were long fascinated with this place. It must be one of the most comprehensive collections of fossils ever discovered in northern Africa. There are fossils from other parts of Africa, of course, like Egypt's Bahariya Formation. But they don't tell us much about life during this time, not like Chem. That's all because those rivers we mentioned in hotter and drier places, they've eroded or still remain buried under the sand. The first discoveries from Chem began in the late 1940s. A scientist named Schubert uncovered bony fish fossils among the escarpment near the Morocco-Algeria border. Just a few years later, a paleontologist, René Lavoca, took things to the next level. Traveling by camelback, he scoured the desert landscape and uncovered a real treasure trove of fossils. He found the partial skeleton of a massive herbivore dinosaur. Finally, at least one peaceful creature in the Chem Beds. This long-necked giant roamed the ancient river valleys and ate leaves like a good boy. For the next several decades, scientists only did small-scale fossil hunting expeditions to this place. There were modest discoveries made here and there. Then, in the 1970s, German paleontologist Helmut Alberti led his team to the Chem Beds, and that's when things took a wild turn. They uncovered fossils of prehistoric fish, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and pieces of the infamous Spinosaurus. Imagine being one of the scientists on that team. They were probably jumping from excitement. By the mid-1990s, the fossil game changed dramatically. Incredible new species were identified from the Chem Beds. Over the years, the discovery pace has only accelerated. Paleontologists, armed with new tools and techniques, have uncovered more fossils than ever before, and there's only more to come.
On January 14, 2022, residents of Anchorage, Alaska, heard a series of loud bangs. They didn't stop for a half an hour. As they found later, the source of the bangs was almost 6,000 miles away in the Tongan archipelago in the southern Pacific Ocean. The Hunga Tonga underwater volcano abruptly woke up from its sound sleep. It last erupted at the end of December 2021 after several years of inactivity. Hunga Tonga sent a large plume of ash into the stratosphere that was seen in the capital city of Tonga, 43 miles away from the volcano. In the following days, it was emitting steam and gas to the height of 7 miles. Plus, it was letting out ash that accumulated next to it and even made the island on which it was standing increase in size. Then it went back to sleep, and the officials even announced it was dormant. But just a couple of weeks later, it woke up again with a crazy force. It sent ash clouds 12 miles into the atmosphere. It blocked the sun in some places and rained down from the sky. The sound waves from the eruption traveled around the planet several times. People in Fiji heard a sound that reminded them of thunder. Some booms even reached Canada. Shockwaves went around the Earth 4 times in Japan and Utah, and at least twice in Massachusetts. The eruption caused tens of thousands of lightning flashes. It also triggered a mega tsunami hundreds of feet high. It caused damage to buildings and infrastructure, such as underwater cables. The extreme waves traveled all the way to the California coast, and there was an unusually high tide along the Pacific coast of Canada. Scientists studied seismic data to understand what caused such a massive eruption. Their research models showed that there was a big blast, likely because gas got trapped in rocks, like how a pressure cooker works when it's overcooked. This blast released a huge amount of energy, as much as 5 of the biggest underground nuclear tests. It all happened under a shallow part of the sea, where gas-filled rock was trapped. Now, normally when a volcano erupts, the fumes cause a temporary cooling effect on the Earth's surface. But Hunga Tonga's eruption was different. It didn't produce many fumes, but released a massive amount of water vapor, equal to 60,000 Olympic swimming pools. The intense heat of the eruption turned vast amounts of seawater into steam, which then blasted high into the atmosphere. All that water vapor ended up in the stratosphere, a layer of the atmosphere that's too dry to form clouds or rain. Scientists don't have any observations of volcanic eruptions like Hunga Tonga to predict its long-term effects on our weather patterns. This is because the only way to measure stratospheric water vapor is with special satellites, which have only been around since 1979, and there hasn't been an eruption similar to Hunga Tonga in that time. In fact, the Tonga eruption is the most well-recorded blast of its kind in recent history. Scientists had lots of tools to study it, like satellites that took pictures from space and sensors that listen to the vibrations and movements in the Earth. There was a similar eruption in 1991 at a volcano in the Philippines, but back then, they didn't have as many advanced tools as they do now to study it closely. Experts from different countries looked at satellite data right after the Hunga Tonga eruption. They wanted to find out how long water vapor would stay in the stratosphere, where it would go, and of course, what this would mean for the planet and for all of us. The first big result of the eruption, at least partially, was a huge hole in the stratosphere that was hanging on for several months in 2023. By the time it appeared, the water vapor had reached the polar stratosphere over Antarctica. But Hunga Tonga ended up with just a minimal effect on global average temperatures, at least for now. Let's just hope it won't repeat the story of Mount Tambora volcano in present-day Indonesia. Over 2 centuries ago, in 1815, this bad guy interrupted and caused the year without a summer. In the following year, the winter was unusually cold and wet across Europe and North America. There were also some catastrophic tsunamis, destroying homes that took 10,000 lives and 80,000 more who fell ill in the aftermath. Now, you can't miss an event like Hunga Tonga or Tambora eruption, but some underwater volcanoes are discovered by accident. A passenger on a commercial flight looked out her window above the Pacific Ocean and saw a weirdly colored patch on the water. She thought it could be an oil slick or a floating pumice raft, which is a telltale sign of a recent volcanic eruption. She decided to send a photo of this scene to a geologist. And that's how scientists found one of the largest volcanoes in the world, Havre. It's hiding about 3,000 feet below the surface. In 2012, Havre had a massive eruption that lasted about 90 days. Hot lava poured out of 14 different vents around the volcano's semicircle-shaped opening. Havre is just one of many volcanic systems covered by thousands of feet of water. These volcanoes are the most active on Earth and are part of a giant system called mid-ocean ridges that stretches around the world. This system produces about 75% of all the magma that comes out of Earth's volcanoes each year. It releases over half a cubic mile of lava. When the magma cools down, it forms the edges of new ocean plates, which are like giant puzzle pieces that make up the Earth's crust. A team of scientists studied material left on the ocean floor by volcanic eruptions from the Bronze Age. About 3,600 years ago, a volcano that was partly underwater in the southern Aegean Sea woke up with a bang. This eruption destroyed the island of Santorini and sent massive amounts of ash, rocks, and gases into the air. It left behind thick layers of ash and rock that settled in piles on the ocean floor. Scientists have been studying the ancient Santorini eruption for several years to figure out what happens during such massive ones. Their research helps explain how future volcanic eruptions could affect the weather on our planet. The study also helps scientists understand the strength of the eruptions, how high the eruption columns might go, and the sizes of the waves that form when all that ash and rock settles into terraces on the ocean floor. This information will help predict the dangers of future eruptions. Now, when a volcano erupts, the last place you want to be is inside it. But scientists did it for you. Well, kinda. They produced a smart new imaging technique that uses the best ideas from medical imaging and optical telescopes. Matrix imaging, that's what it's called, makes it easier to understand what's happening underground, even when there aren't many sensors available. These sensors, called geophones, detect and record the movement of seismic waves, which are vibrations that travel through the Earth. By studying these waves, scientists can learn about the distinct types of rocks and how they are arranged beneath the surface. The researchers test their method on a volcano in Guadalupe in the Caribbean Sea. There aren't so many geophones on this site, but the scientists combined the data from multiple geophones thanks to this new tech. They used a special trick called the memory effect to reverse the distortions that happen when seismic waves bounce off different underground materials and figure out what the original signals look like. The researchers could clearly see the structure inside the volcano down to a depth of about 6 miles, with incredibly detailed images in a resolution of over 300 feet. They found out that there are many layers of magma stored underground. These layers are connected to other deep parts of the Earth. Knowing about these layers and how they work could help scientists make better guesses about when a volcano might erupt. If they can do that, they might be able to warn people earlier and keep them safe from dangerous eruptions. So get this, Taylor Swift takes a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo that leaves at 10 a.m. on February 20th. She's on the plane for 12 hours, but she lands only at 2 p.m. the next day in Tokyo. That's a 28-hour difference. So, how did this time warp happen? Well, it's all because of this wonky line. This is the International Date Line. You know, that imaginary line that slices the globe in half and decides who gets to celebrate the new year first? It's the Line Islands, by the way. But crossing this line doesn't just make you feel like you've stepped into a transporter. It actually changes your day. Cross from east to west and boom, it's 24 hours later. If you travel in the opposite direction, crossing the line from the western side to the eastern side, you go back an entire calendar day. Now, you'd think that the International Date Line would be a nice, neat, straight line in the ocean where the time zones switch. But in reality, it's as if someone took a ruler and said, let's make this complicated. The line zigzags all over the place, wrapping around islands and causing all sorts of head-scratching confusion. For instance, Big Diomede Island and Little Diomede Island are only 2.5 miles apart, but have a 21-hour time difference. And things can get a little more complicated depending on which time zone a country follows. For example, if you travel 659 miles across the date line from Baker Island to Tokelau, you must add 25 hours. In other words, that's 1 day and 1 hour. And if that doesn't sound weird enough for you, wait, it gets crazier. When it's 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday in New York, it's still Wednesday night in American Samoa. Meanwhile, over in Kiribati, it's already Friday. Yep, we're talking about 3 different calendar days happening at the same time because of this one imaginary crazy line. This phenomenon occurs every day between 10 o'clock and 10:59 in the morning. So, why does the International Date Line look so ridiculous in the first place? Well, great question. Although these zigzags may seem completely arbitrary, they actually have a logical basis. It's pretty much a made-up concept based on the Earth's rotation. The Earth is always spinning, thank goodness, and it takes about 24 hours, or a day, to complete one full rotation. To keep things in sync, people took the Earth and divided it into 24 time zones, each 15 degrees apart. But what is the starting point for a day on Earth? Well, basically, people needed to figure out which of these 24 zones or lines would be the starting line, or the chronocenter. They needed a reference point, a line where they could begin adding or subtracting time as you move east or west. That line is what we now call the prime meridian. But here's the catch. Deciding where to put this starting line, the prime meridian, is totally arbitrary. The idea of establishing a line where days begin and end goes all the way back to at least the 1300s. Back then, map makers were doing their own thing, picking their own east-west dividing lines called meridians, which, by the way, is just a fancy Latin word for midday. Without a universal standard for when a day officially started or ended, sailors on long voyages just had to wing it, figuring out how to handle the time they were gaining or losing along the way. So, in 1884, people decided to organize this whole mess. 25 nations gathered at the prestigious International Meridian Conference in the United States with one big goal: to decide on a line that would serve as the official prime meridian. Finally, like it or not, they were determined to create the International Date Line that the whole world would accept and would follow from that point forward. The prime meridian was established in Greenwich, England, and the International Date Line was placed on the opposite side, running through the 180th meridian. Well, sounds simple, right? But that's when the nightmare really began. The chosen International Date Line didn't just wander through uninhabited areas. Oh no! It split some countries in half and created all sorts of chaos. I mean, if you divide the world with a completely straight vertical line, you end up with situations where half of a country is 1 day ahead and the other half is 1 day behind. Take Kiribati, for example. The country is primarily centered in the Gilbert Islands, which sits just west of the International Date Line. However, in 1979, Their territory got a little bigger with the Phoenix and Line Islands, which are way east of the dateline. Suddenly, Kiribati was straddling the international dateline. This created a bit of a headache for businesses. Folks on either side could only communicate by radio or phone for 4 weekdays a week. Now, to fix this quirky situation, Kiribati decided to skip Saturday, December 31st, 1994, right off the calendar. So Friday, December 30th, turned into Sunday, January 1st, 1995. And just like that, New Year's Day came a day early. Woohoo! After that, the dateline moved eastward to go around the entire country. So the same thing that happened to Kiribati happened to other countries as well. For example, when they got to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, the line made another detour to include them. And when they got south of the equator, well, guess what? Another eastward bend to cover even more islands. And that's pretty much why the straight line started to get a bit ziggy-zaggy. This wonky line is designed to avoid land as much as possible, so there's less hassle when it comes to changing days. So, no, you can't stand between the international dateline, like having one foot in one day and the other in the next. But you can cross it by boat. In fact, some fancy trans-Pacific cruises even offer a time travel package for adventurous travelers who want to cross the line and jump into the future. Now, in the end, the international dateline looks this ridiculous because it was constructed based on a series of arbitrary decisions, historical quirks, and a whole lot of confusion. But it's not just because people organized it in the 19th century that there is no confusion regarding time zones today. Another thing that the prime meridian establishes is Coordinated Universal Time, the famous UTC. Now, UTC never changes for daylight savings time or anything else. However, in 1908, Canada decided to spice things up by creating Daylight Saving Time, or DST. Their idea was to set the clocks 1 hour ahead of Standard Time to make better use of sunlight in the spring and summer and fall evenings. The idea was so brilliant that most countries jumped on board, but not everyone. Just look at Nepal. They have never ever used the Daylight Savings Time, which means their clocks do not change throughout the entire year. As you probably know, countries with large territories often have more than one time zone. Just like the United States, which has 11 time zones. Australia has 9, while India is a special case. Look, India is a big country with an area that stretches around 1,800 miles from west to east. So it should have 3 time zones in total, but they only have one. This means that the sun rises almost 90 minutes earlier in Dong in the Far East than in Gujarmoti in the West. And why do they have only one time zone? Well, basically, because they can. Just remember that the international dateline and time zones are invisible, artificial, and now you know, totally arbitrary. So if a country wants to stick with just one time zone to simplify processes and business operations within its border, then hey, why not? Now at first glance, it seems like we're on a giant raft called a continent that's just floating around on some molten lava until it hits another continent. Okay, let's make a quick stop at high school science class. Our home planet is like a cake with different layers of ingredients stacked up on top of each other. The Earth's core, mantle, and crust. Hey, where's the frosting? The cake batter on top represents the crust of the Earth, made up of 3 types of tasty rock: igneous, sedimentary, and, say it with me, metamorphic. These rocks are formed in different ways, such as from solidified lava or from the deposits of particles and minerals. The crust is what we stand on, a home to our continents, oceans, and everything we see around us. Then you have the mantle, not the baseball player, the layer that lies right below the crust. Many people think that the mantle is just lava, but it's not quite like that. Just like how you mix different ingredients in the cake batter, the mantle is made up of different types of rocks that are constantly moving and shifting. And finally, we get to the sweetest part of the cake, the center, or in the case of Earth, the core. It has 2 parts, the outer and inner core. The outer core is made of molten rocks and metals that are incredibly hot, even hotter than the surface of the sun. The inner core is solid, even though temperatures there are crazy. It doesn't turn into liquid because the pressure down there is amazingly strong. When you see all this, you can easily think that below us there are endless miles of lava and hot rocks. So, how come tectonic plates move at all? The continents don't float on a sea of molten rock. The oceanic and continental crusts really sit on a mantle. Sure, there's a layer of liquid rock in our planet, the outer core, around 1,800 miles below the surface, but it's separated from the surface by the mantle that's thick and solid. So, the Earth's tectonic plates move around because they're on a thick layer of solid rock, the upper mantle. Basically, this rock is under incredible pressure and heat, which makes it flow in slow motion over time. Think of it like honey or syrup that you pour over your cake layers. As you move the cake around, the honey or syrup will also move and flow. Similarly, the upper mantle can flow and drag the parts above it along, just way slower than honey. And the rock is both breakable and flexible. It can crack and break like a cookie, now I'm getting hungry, but it can also stretch and bend like a piece of taffy. When the plates get caught on each other, they can't move anymore. But when they break free, they start drifting again, like puzzle pieces shifting around until they find their perfect fit. Extremely high temperatures and pressure are the reason this flow happens. It's like a big pot of soup on the stove. As the soup heats up, it starts to move around, carrying heat from one spot to another. Is it lunchtime? And speaking of lunch, lava, it's not just molten rocks that travel all the way up from the outer core to volcanoes. When tectonic plates come together and one slides underneath the other, they create a lot of heat and pressure while grinding against each other. It's like rubbing your hands together fast and they start to get hot, or when you start a fire with rocks. And as the melted rock, or magma, rises to the surface, it can create volcanoes. Now, long ago, the Earth's land was not divided into continents as it is today. Instead, there was one giant landmass known as Pangaea, meaning all Earth in Greek. Whoa! Imagine being stuck in the middle of this giant ocean. So, over time, this supercontinent slowly broke apart. Its parts drifted away from each other and formed the separate lands we call continents. This idea first popped out in the 16th century when one cartographer realized the coastlines of Africa, America, and Europe appear like they could fit together like puzzle pieces. Later, researchers realized the rock composition of their coastlines was similar, which means they used to be part of one giant mass, and they called that the theory of continental drift. At first, people were pretty skeptical about that idea because they didn't know how such massive lands could move around. Now, we'd all be able to explain that part, right? So, the Earth's crust is divided into a couple of large plates and many smaller ones. All of them are still moving, even though it's in slow motion. We can't sense it, and we won't see any particular changes during our lifetime. It's a process that lasts hundreds of millions of years. As the plates move, they interact with one another in fascinating ways. For example, when two plates collide, one may be forced beneath the other, which would help create a subduction zone. Over time, this is the way you get many cool things like volcanic islands, trenches, and even entire mountain ranges. Plates apparently started moving around 3.5 billion years ago. It took them a while to group into the first jigsaw supercontinent we know about called Ur. Today, its remains make up parts of Madagascar, India, and Australia. Pangaea formed 335 million years ago, but it probably won't be the last continent that will form. So, some new generations in the distant future could live on something called the next Pangaea. When the oceanic crust of the Atlantic Ocean slowly takes its place under the continental crust, the oceanic basin of the Atlantic is going to close, which is why the continents will end up pulled together. This means the Americas will meet Africa, and Eurasia will be flipped on its side. So people might live on a giant landmass in the shape of a ring, clustered around the inner sea, or at least what's left of it. Or maybe continents will take another direction and make up a different jigsaw puzzle called Amasia. In this scenario, the Americans will drift westward, fuse with Australia, and pivot to around Siberia. And then there's more. Novo Pangea is the option where the Americas swing together to embrace Antarctica and Australia, and Africa legs off to the northwest. Basically, all continents here get together to form a giant landmass that stretches from one pole to the other. Ready for one more? Nah, come on. A recent projection called Eureka gives an idea similar to Novo Pangea. It's just that all continents here unite to become one gigantic land that clusters around the equator. Maybe this would be my favorite one to live at, with the sunny weather and the beach all the time. And who knows what kind of magnificent trenches, mountains, islands, and other geological beauties we'd get with this giant supercontinent. Pangea broke up about 175 million years ago. As the Atlantic and Indian Oceans began to widen towards the east, the Ring of Fire was formed. It's a path that goes along the Pacific Ocean with so many frequent earthquakes and active volcanoes. This way, Eurasia was unable to cross this border and continue moving westward. And now Eurasia could move laterally along the Ring of Fire. The subduction zones kind of act like a barrier that forces the tectonic plates to move in different directions. So Eurasia could eventually collide with the Americas and form something similar to Amasia. It would be cool to sit there, grab the popcorn, and watch it from the side. But this is something that won't happen for the next 50 million years at least. I'm willing to bet I probably won't be here to see it. Different theories talk about different positions where this new supercontinent might end up one day. But it seems it will probably be somewhere in the polar area, centered on what we today recognize as the Arctic Ocean. Not my cup of tea. Bring me back the sunny one. Wait, scratch that. Let's go eat.
On September 16th of 2023, without warning, the Earth began to hum. A low, strange vibration reverberated through the crust. This set off seismic alarms all across the globe. For 9 days straight, the planet was pulsing with this horrifying rhythm, and scientists had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, the total disaster was happening in Greenland. It wasn't an earthquake. They knew that much. They could tell it by the rhythm. Since we all live on giant tectonic plates, they constantly move and slide on magma like icebergs on water. Sometimes as they move, they can rub against each other or collide or break. In any case, all this causes an incredible release of energy that sends shockwaves through the ground. That's when we feel the ground literally shaking, and it's what we call an earthquake. These vibrations we feel are called seismic waves. Seismometers pick them up as pings or rumbles. In a typical earthquake, they create a bunch of different frequencies. It's a crazy chaotic mix of low and high frequencies, like smashing every piano key. What was weird about the Greenland event is that the signals weren't like that at all. It was a steady, single-frequency vibration, as if some ancient machine was stirring beneath the Earth. It's like one piano key being struck over and over, creating a doom-like, repetitive sound. Turns out, what they were hearing wasn't the noise of tectonic plates going wild. It was a phenomenon seismologists had never seen before. The days passed, and the mysterious noise just kept going. The vibrations repeated every 90 seconds, echoing around the world. The hunt for answers was growing more desperate. Seismologists had no idea what they were dealing with. They had to gather a huge international team of 68 people from 15 countries. All these scientists were gathering seismic data, satellite images, and doing some advanced math for several days, until they finally realized who the culprit was. Water. It all happened in a remote, desolate region of East Greenland. This place is full of fjords. narrow inlets of the sea between high cliffs, kinda like deep water-filled valleys surrounded by towering rocky sides. In this area, surrounded by jagged peaks and icy waters, the air was still. The landscape seemingly frozen in time. Nothing here changed much for years. Until one day. A colossal landslide has unfolded in the Dixon Fjord. One of those steep mountainsides towering over the fjord at almost 4,000 feet high collapsed in a massive landslide. Picture a huge chunk of this mountain crumbling and crashing down into the fjord below. This sent a deluge of rock and ice crashing into the water. The impact was just apocalyptic, 882 million cubic feet of debris. That's enough ice and rock to fill 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, or 10 Great Pyramids of Giza. And all this nightmare hurled into the water with such force that it kick-started a tsunami about 360 feet high, taller than the Statue of Liberty, into the air. What's crazy is that this incredibly powerful wave was trapped in the fjord by narrow cliffs, unable to escape. It's like water sloshing in a closed bathtub. For 9 days, the mega tsunami continued to churn through it. That's why we heard this endless hum. It was a rhythmic back and forth of the water slamming against the walls. The shock waves were rippling deep into Earth's crust, vibrations so strong that they were picked up by seismometers around the globe. This was a phenomenon so rare, so unprecedented, that it left scientists stunned. It turned out to be a perfect storm of elements. A glacier, weakened by years of warming, could no longer bear the weight of the mountain above. This collapse was inevitable, and the chaos literally shook the Earth to its core. And people often hang out in this area with cruise ships passing by. We're lucky that no lives were lost in the disaster. It was a close call though. A tourist ship stranded in the area just 2 days before narrowly escaped the tsunami's reach by pure luck. But it doesn't mean there were no losses. The waves destroyed a nearby Inuit site, which was there untouched for over 200 years. They also swept away the huts at a research station that were about 43 miles away. The vibrations traveled from Greenland to the South Pole in less than an hour. That just shows how dangerous events like this can be. And this isn't the only place where such catastrophes are happening. In the beautiful California community of Rancho Palos Verdes, the ground is shifting so quickly that it's tearing homes apart. The land there has always been kinda unstable. It has some unique geology. It's built on soft, clay-rich soil and sits on a geological fault line, which makes it prone to landslides. This means that this land is prone to slow natural shifting over many years, even when no crazy weather is happening. It's been like this for decades, but usually it's slow and pretty manageable, like about a foot a year. Imagine a tree that you played with as a kid moving 20 feet to the left as you grow up. For decades, residents adapted. They built their homes on adjustable beams. This helped the houses to move with the land, and that strategy worked well until now. Recently, things have been getting much worse in the community. Now, the land is moving by a foot in a single week. That would be like if the same tree moved almost 960 feet since you were a child. The past 2 years have also caused some heavy rains, and the weather has been getting worse. This increased water content in the soil. The land became heavier and more prone to rapid movement. Now, this once idyllic seaside escape turned into a disaster zone. Cracks have appeared in closets, gardens, and roads, growing larger with each passing day. Streets that were once smooth are now buckled and twisted, with roads turning into a crazy theme park. Houses that once stood firm are being ripped from their foundations, some of them split in half. One of the houses had its front door 8 feet off the ground. Entire neighborhoods have been plunged into chaos. Utility companies had to switch off gas and electricity indefinitely to prevent potential disasters. The hardest hit is the coastal neighborhood of Portuguese Bend, where residents are living on the edge, literally. It always had amazing ocean views and cool sea breezes, with horses and peacocks still wandering the tree-lined streets. But now, it's like an earthquake hit. Only this time, the Earth isn't stopping. For many, this place feels like paradise, if only the land would stop shifting beneath their feet. So the locals don't give up. Some of them had to leave, but many are determined to stay and fight, despite the destruction. But they still have to pour in hundreds of thousands of dollars to save their properties. People have installed generators to keep the lights on and set up sewer systems and pumps to drain the groundwater causing the landslides. Some say that the only way for these neighborhoods to survive might be to go completely off-grid, installing power walls to store energy and stuff like that. People are trying their best to run the sewer system off generators. They hope that they could get rid of this water in the soil that's causing these hellish landslides in the first place. They're determined to fight, but they will need help and support from the government to fight this disaster. Landslides are actually more common across the US than many might think. And new maps and data show that tons of people in the country might be in danger. Scientists managed to create the first very detailed, very cool map that shows where these landslides might happen, county by county. It's based on a lot of data and the history of 1 million previous landslides. They say that nearly 40% of the United States is at risk of experiencing landslide activity, which could lead to some insane catastrophes in certain areas. Luckily, now both residents and engineers can keep this in mind. But all this shows how vulnerable we are to natural disasters, and how we should always stay alerted.
Imagine standing in the middle of Europe 40,000 years ago. The landscape is rough, cold, and unforgiving. Fast food is scarce, and there's no internet. Suddenly, from out of the woods steps a figure, stocky, strong, and with a face that is quite unusual. This human looks similar to us, but something about them is different. Their brow is heavy, their nose is broad, and their body seems to be built to fight nature itself. Well, congrats! You've just met a Neanderthal. You might have thought that Neanderthals were basically ancient humans, but that's not really true. We come from the same genus called Homo, but we, all modern humans, belong to one same species called Homo sapiens. However, there used to be lots of human species before, and Homo neanderthalensis was just one of them. And they actually were kind of cooler than us. So what in the world has happened to them? Neanderthals lived for a long time, for about 360,000 years, across Europe and parts of Asia. 40,000 years ago, the place we now call southern Italy was sitting on top of a huge disaster, a massive supervolcano called Campi Flegrei. This big boy is huge, about 9 miles wide. That's about 10 to 20 minutes in a car to get across it all. But there were no cars then, remember? At the time, it was quiet for a while, but one day, suddenly, it blew in what became one of the biggest volcanic eruptions Europe had seen in 200,000 years. The catastrophe was so crazy that ash, gases, and debris altered the climate across the entire continent. What comes next is usually called a volcanic winter. Average temperatures drop, the sky gets darker, and life becomes even harsher than it already is. The eruption, known as the Campanian Ingembrite, caused Europe to cool by as much as 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't sound like much? Well, the drop of even 1 degree would cause winters to become harsher, causing horrible snowfall, rains, and floods. Crops would struggle to grow, leading to food shortages. The weather would go wild, too, with storms and droughts. Kind of like now. Except multiply this by 7. Events like these caused some huge chaos in modern times. You can imagine what it did to the Neanderthals. But in reality, a simple volcanic eruption shouldn't destroy an entire species, right? Well, yes. The truth is, the Neanderthals were already hanging by a thread back then, and all because of us. They've been in a tough spot for a while. They lived in places that are now parts of Europe, Western Asia, and the Middle East. Modern humans, us Homo sapiens, entered Europe and were giving them some serious competition for food and shelter. Homo sapiens were sneaky dudes, better at finding food, easily adapting to different environments, and using more advanced tools. We were pushing Neanderthals out, trying to get the same resources. We literally made their extinction a slow and very unpleasant process. So, while the volcano definitely made things worse, it wasn't their only problem, and they didn't completely disappear after the eruption. Some of them hung on in isolated places, like Gibraltar, for another 12,000 years. That's because it's likely most of the severe cooling actually happened farther east, away from where the Neanderthals were trying to survive, and it didn't hit their homes as hard as we thought. In fact, the eruption may have even helped them, at least for a while. Some scientists say that the volcanic fallout might have slowed down modern humans' expansion into Neanderthal territory and gave the poor fellas a little more time to survive. So, the Campiflagre eruption was a nasty event, but it only delayed the inevitable. Campiflagre is a wild card. It's also known as the Fields of Fire. The air itself there is thick with legend. The Greeks and Romans believed this volcano was the gateway to the underworld. Even an ancient Roman poet, Virgil, mentioned this in his famous story, the Aeneid. The hero Aeneas must descend into the underworld, and this place is exactly where he starts. Back in the day, this landscape was full of Roman villas, spas, and fish ponds. The elite had the time of their lives there. What they didn't know, though, was that they were standing on treacherous ground that could go crazy at any moment. The Campiflagre is not your typical volcano. You'd imagine a single towering peak, but the landscape looks deceivingly calm, with small features popping up here and there. But if you flew above it, the sight would be insane. A gigantic circular basin, peppered with volcanic cones and craters, like scars from the Earth's violent past. The danger here lies in its subtlety. The ground beneath your feet is constantly shifting, even when you don't notice it. Every so often, the land rises, only to sink again, sometimes by several feet, as magma or gas moves beneath the surface. It's incredibly creepy. The risk is almost invisible. The Campiflagre is a massive depression formed by two colossal volcanic eruptions. One of them was the one that cooked Neanderthals, and another happened 15,000 years ago. The most famous eruption, though, happened in the 16th century, and it was horrifying. The year was 1538. For years, the people of Paswali had noticed something unsettling. Land that once sat below the waves was slowly rising. What was once the sea had become new ground. Rumblings from deep within the earth were terrifying, but had become a normal part of life. Earthquakes started in the early 1530s, small at first, but in just 8 years, they became the norm. Until one day, on September 28th, horrifying tremors shook the ground. By the next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a massive crack ripped open the earth near the ancient Roman town of Trippergoli. From this gash spewed fire, smoke, and a rain of volcanic ash miles away. It was thick and muddy, likely mixed with underground water. The ground trembled as hot pumice rock was thrown high into the air. And then a new mountain began to rise from the land. This was the birth of what we now call Monte Novo. Eventually, things seemed to calm down, as if the earth was catching its breath. For days, things seemed quiet. Locals relaxed a bit. They began to approach the new mysterious volcano, a crater with something that resembled boiling within it. People visited it like a new attraction. But then, just days later, the disaster struck again. At night, without warning, a new mountain went wild. A blast from the southern flank hurled scoria, chunks of jagged volcanic rock, into the air. This one was fatal for 24 people. The debris found afterwards was huge and coarse. For centuries after, the only signs of life from the Monte Novo were small fumaroles, jets of gas seeping from the earth. But then, even those faded away. Now it's just a lush green cone, a pretty sleeping giant. But the ground near Naples, Italy, is still alive. The Campiflagre sits quietly for now, but it might not be for long. It's showing signs it might be waking up again. This supervolcano looks like a hellish landscape, with its boiling mud pits, geysers, and steam vents. Romans and medieval Christians once believed it was a gateway to the underworld, And who can blame them? What's spooky is that recently scientists detected unusual activity under the surface. In 2012, Italian authorities raised the alert level on the volcano from green to yellow, meaning that it needs close monitoring. There are certain changes that usually happen before an eruption. The magma below starts releasing gases, which could weaken the rock above, eventually triggering a disaster. Unfortunately, no one can predict exactly when or if it will erupt. But if it does, the consequences could range from a minor inconvenience for locals to a global catastrophe. Its last tiny eruption happened in the 16th century, and it wasn't too bad. But if history repeats itself, like it was with Neanderthals, we're all cooked. An eruption like that could lead to global cooling, crop failures, and widespread famine. Right now, a group of scientists is trying to get a clearer picture of what's happening beneath the surface. The Campi Flegrei Deep Drilling Project is working to drill a 10,000-foot borehole, hoping to check out the magma chamber up close. But at least for now, the supervolcano remains quiet, and let's hope it stays that way.
There's something really bizarre going on at these 12 points scattered across the Earth. The Vile Vortices, as they're called, are these creepy spots over the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, and the North and South Poles, where weird forces seem to take over. You've probably heard of the most famous one, the Bermuda Triangle. It's believed that more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes have mysteriously disappeared in this area, which is located between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. But what most people don't realize is that the Bermuda Triangle actually has 11 siblings, and these other spots can be even more terrifying. Let's start with Mohenjo-Daro. This was a thriving city located in what is now Pakistan. Built around 2500 before the Common Era, this urban center was once home to about 40,000 people. But then, suddenly, people abandoned it by the year 1700 before the Common Era. In the 1940s, an archaeologist discovered 39 human skeletons at the site, which fueled the theory that the city was invaded by some other civilization at some point. But honestly, it's hard to confirm that, since archaeology doesn't really explain the city's sudden destruction or the disappearance of its people. It's led to a bunch of bizarre theories. One of them talks about an ancient extraterrestrial race that might have lived there, and a malevolent wind that swept through the city. Another ancient city with a similar mystery is the Great Zimbabwe. Its construction began in the 11th century, and at its peak it housed up to 18,000 people. But for reasons we'll probably never fully understand, it was abandoned in the 15th century. Archaeologists were really interested in this place, and that's when things got even weirder. They found 8 of these birds, now called the Zimbabwe birds. These soapstone sculptures were found sitting on stone columns that were over 90 centimeters tall. Nothing like them has ever been found anywhere else, and their meaning is still a total mystery. Some think each bird represents a new king, but other theories suggest they were ancient animals very dear to the people who lived there. Adding to the mystery, local legends talk about a strange, short man who's sometimes seen wandering around, but he always disappears before anyone can get close. Then there's Easter Island, another one of the 12 Vile Vortices. It's located in the eastern Pacific Ocean, and it's famous for its nearly 1,000 enormous statues called moai. We still don't know what they mean, or how they were made. Some of them are almost 30 feet tall and weigh as much as 80 tons. Today, it wouldn't be that tough to move and carve these statues, but we're talking about a period between the years 1100 and 1680. So nobody really knows how they did it. Some specialists believe these statues were carried across the island, while others think they were pushed on log rollers. But the most bizarre theories suggest extraterrestrials were involved. Algeria is another land rich in ancient mysteries. And one of the most fascinating is something called the Jedars. These are 13 monuments with square stone bases and angular mounds, built between the 4th and 7th centuries. But the weird part is, no one knows their purpose. One of them had an inscription in Latin, but it was so worn down that the message was nearly impossible to read. The best guess so far is that these monuments were probably tombs for royalty, although no one knows exactly who was supposed to be buried there. What we do know is that there are many myths related to strange disappearances in the region. The next mysterious spot is located south of Tokyo in the Pacific Ocean, and it's called the Dragon's Triangle. Does that name ring a bell? Yep. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, this area is known for strange disappearances of airplanes and ships. One of the most chilling stories dates back to 1945, when a plane allegedly vanished. The pilot supposedly sent a radio transmission right before the aircraft disappeared, claiming that something strange was happening in the sky, like it was opening up or something. While this story is definitely eerie, the truth behind it and many other Dragon's Triangle legends is still up for debate. If you type Hamakulia volcano into Google Earth, you'll find it located in Hawaii's Ring of Fire. But this place is so shrouded in mystery that it's hard to find much information about it. Some legends speak of unusual electrical energy being detected in the area, and there's even a story about an eyewitness who claimed to see a plane flying over it totally disappear from the radar. Another eerie spot is the South Atlantic Anomaly, which is an area on Earth where natural radiation flows out of control. While this doesn't affect our daily lives on the surface, it has a pretty big impact on Earth's atmosphere. The radiation there is so intense that it can knock out the onboard computers of spacecraft and interfere with the data collected by satellites passing through the area. To deal with this, specialists had to add an additional shield to the International Space Station. The South Atlantic Anomaly is also linked to a weird event that astronauts experience called cosmic ray visual phenomena. They've reported seeing random flashes of light, or shooting stars out there in space, but it's all just some kind of illusion. From wild radiation to strange seismic activity. The Wharton Basin in the Indian Ocean is a place known for unusual tectonic events. In April of 2012, a massive earthquake measuring magnitude 8.6 hit the region. This was considered the largest intraplate earthquake ever recorded, meaning it happened within a tectonic plate rather than at its boundary. This caught the attention of scientists, who now speculate that the region might be forming a new boundary between the Australian and Indian plates. But for now, this is all still one big mystery. Now let's head to the Pacific Ocean. More specifically, to the New Hebrides Trench. This submarine trench is about 750 miles long and 45 miles wide. It formed when the Australian plate slid under the New Hebrides plate. There's no doubt that this is one of the creepiest and deepest spots in the ocean. The danger isn't just down in the deep sea either, as this trench has been connected to several earthquakes that affected New Caledonia and Vanuatu. This area also has some strange features. For example, when scientists explored it, they didn't find a single grenadier fish down there. This type of fish is one of the most common deep-sea creatures you would expect to see in trenches around the Pacific. So why aren't they around the New Hebrides Trench? Maybe they know something we don't. The two remaining Vile Vortices are the North and South Poles. These two are on the opposite ends of the planet, but they share one thing in common: strange disappearances. One of the most famous stories from the North Pole happened in 1897. 3 brave explorers set out on a journey to reach the North Pole using a hot air balloon. But they never completed their mission. Their mysterious disappearance remains one of the most intriguing, unsolved mysteries in the history of Arctic exploration. The South Pole is also known for similar mysteries. It's believed that hundreds of people may be buried beneath the snow and ice of the coldest continent on Earth. Even with all the advancements in technology and knowledge, the South Pole can still be extremely dangerous for anyone who ventures there. The temperatures can drop to almost minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and the winds can get up to 200 miles per hour. And that's definitely enough reason to stay away. Now that you're familiar with the 12 Vile Vortices, let me tell you something even stranger. If you look at a map, you'll see that these places are arranged in a way that looks pretty similar across the globe. Here's the weird part. If you connect these spots where unexplained events have occurred, you actually form the geometric shape of an icosahedron. This could be just a huge coincidence, but the fact that these mystery spots align with this shape makes them even more intriguing.
Ooh, you're diving into the dark and icy waters of Antarctica. The airy blue darkness is enveloping you, reminiscent of the vast expanse of open space. In these depths, where you least expect to encounter any living creature, you suddenly hear a loud, strange sound. A quacking noise, as if a giant duck was hidden in the deep. In 1960, researchers first recorded this sound and named it bioduck. Clever. For decades, they tried to unravel the mystery of its source. Was it a giant kraken? An extraterrestrial spaceship that had crashed into the ocean? A mysterious sea monster? Or perhaps an enormous duck? There were many versions, one more bizarre than the other. Oceanographers detected similar sounds in other locations as well. Off the western coast of Australia and near New Zealand, they recorded similar but higher pitch signals, which they named bio-goose. It seems the creepy atmosphere of the story disappears with such names. Anyways, these sounds were not isolated incidents. They happened multiple times with consistent intervals. Many initially thought the source must be mechanical, given the regularity of the sounds. However, studying the oceans in the latter half of the 20th century was challenging because of limited technologies. Nevertheless, scientists persisted in collecting data on bioduck and biogoose, driven by their insatiable curiosity. As more data accumulated, so did the theories. But scientists eventually uncovered the mystery. Bioduck turned out to be a form of communication with a biological origin. When researchers analyzed the repeating sounds, they noticed that the signals never overlapped. One source would speak while the others remained silent, suggesting a form of communication. The question remained, which ocean creature possessed such an extraordinary method of communicating through varied frequency sounds? The answer, as many have guessed, is whales. Scientists compared the bioduck sound from Antarctica with the calls of minke whales and found striking similarities. The biogoose sounds from the waters off Australia and New Zealand likely belong to other species or very young minke whales. This discovery, however, only deepened the mystery. What purpose did these sounds serve? Were the whales discussing their dinner plans, laughing at the humans recording their voices, or perhaps sharing deep insights about the universe? The possibilities were endless, but the most astonishing revelation was that humans might one day learn to communicate with these magnificent creatures. Communicating with whales is no longer a far-fetched idea. Scientists from the University of California have already established contact with a humpback whale named Twain. In a groundbreaking experiment, researchers conducted a 20-minute conversation with the marine mammal. Here's how they did it. The specialists went on a marine expedition to the coast of Alaska, where they recorded the sounds of a group of humpback whales. Then they played these sounds through speakers, sending the signals back into the ocean. The recorded sounds resembled a greeting, like, "Hey, what's up?" but in the whale language. These greetings are used by whales to call each other or indicate their location. Now, soon after sending the signals, the researchers received a response. Twain approached the boat, circled it, and replied with a "hey" of its own. This marked the beginning of the first ever human-whale conversation. For 20 minutes, the scientists sent 36 signals to Twain, and each time the whale responded. Moreover, it waited for time intervals before answering. That is, the team received a response from the whale, waited 10 seconds, and turned on the sound again. Researchers then waited 10 seconds and answered. It seems that Twain was a very delicate interlocutor. Maybe it was a gentleman in the whale world, who knows? Or maybe it was simply intrigued by the unusual interaction. The signals used in this communication belonged to a group of whales that included Twain. It's likely that the researchers had recorded Twain's own sounds and used them to communicate with it. In a sense, Twain was conversing with itself. Now let's continue our journey and venture into the deepest oceanic trench on Earth, the Mariana Trench. A quick reminder, the Mariana Trench is a colossal chasm in the ocean floor, stretching over 1,500 miles south of Japan and reaching a depth of nearly 36,000 feet at its deepest point. To put that into perspective, the height of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, is like 1/10 of the Mariana Trench's depth. Now imagine this. In this deep, dark abyss, scientists recorded a strange sound. Unlike bioduct, this sound resembled something from a science fiction movie, a low rumble, followed by a metallic ping, reminiscent of the sounds made by spaceships in sci-fi movies. Researchers named this mysterious phenomenon biotwang noises. Scientists first detected this strange sound in 2014 during an acoustic survey of the Mariana Trench, and they quickly identified its source: whales, specifically Bride's whales. Using artificial intelligence, researchers analyzed around 200,000 hours of audio recordings from the ocean and found matches with a group of Bride's whales. Like other animals, these whales use sounds as a form of communication. Now, did you know what else was found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? A plastic bottle. It's unlikely it was done by a kraken or a whale or some type of monster. Everything is simpler here. The bottle ended up there because of a human. But that's a topic for another video. Okay, let's deal with one more sound. No whales this time, just a mysterious sound in the loneliest place on Earth. This place is called Point Nemo, and that's why it's so lonely. Located in the South Pacific Ocean, Point Nemo is the most remote spot from any land. The nearest island is 1,450 nautical miles away. It's about the same long distance from land in all other directions. Moreover, here, there's almost no marine life, since few water currents reach this spot, and therefore few nutrients are supplied. In a sense, it's a water desert. And so, in 1997, oceanographers recorded a very strange and frightening sound coming from the depths in the area of Point Nemo. It was something gigantic and scary. People called it the bloop. As soon as journalists found out about this phenomenon, people around the world began to invent the most fantastic versions. The most popular of them was that the sound source was a giant sea monster, kraken, or some other creature. The hype around the bloop didn't last very long. Scientists managed to find out the nature of the mysterious noise. It turned out it belonged to an iceberg. When they crack and collapse, they create powerful ultra-low frequency sounds that can be heard from a very long distance. To confirm this version, scientists recorded the sounds of other icebergs and heard something similar to the bloop. Oh, by the way, Point Nemo is so lonely that space agencies drop out-of-service satellites here. Space objects just fall in the water. There's a 99% chance that no animal or human will be harmed by falling debris in this lonely place. That's why many people call it the satellite cemetery. But what if, someday, a spaceship from another planet falls here? What if it has already fallen in Point Nemo and sometimes emits an emergency signal that breaks through the ocean? Ooh. All the mysteries you have heard have already been solved. How about we end this video with a mystery that still baffles scientists? Meet Upsweep. One of the most mysterious sounds ever recorded in the ocean. It's not just noise, it's a series of short ascending tones repeated at intervals of several seconds. It was first discovered in 1991 using hydrophones installed in the Pacific Ocean. At first, oceanographers suggested that upsweep could be associated with volcanic activity or underwater earthquakes. But the seasonal nature of the sound and its intensity change depending on the time of year, which rules out these versions. People began to consider hypotheses related to the biological life of the ocean. They studied the migration routes of marine animals and their behavior at different times of the year. However, despite all efforts, the sound source has not been identified. Some studies suggest that upsweep may be associated with certain species of fish or other marine animals that make sounds for communication or navigation, but no one has been able to prove it.
The ground suddenly starts shaking. Clouds of gas start forming in the sky, making it dark during broad daylight. Bits of the ground start swelling, lifting, and even collapsing. These are the telltale signs of a volcano that is bound to erupt. And this is what could easily happen again with Mount Spur. It's only about 75 miles from Anchorage, one of Alaska's busiest cities. More than half of the population of the northernmost state of the US live there. There's also a huge amount of air cargo that passes through its international airport daily. So anytime a volcano this close to such a vital hub begins to get restless, people start paying attention. Just FYI, approximately 350 million people in the world live within the danger range of an active volcano. That means that around 1 out of 20 people live in an area at risk of volcanic activity. Alaskans probably wish that Spur's reawakening was fiction, but it's actually true. The Alaska Volcano Observatory picked up on several of these "I'm about to erupt" signs from Mount Spur. So much so that they raised the alert level to yellow, which means unrest above normal background levels. Spur erupted twice in the 90s, and it was pretty intense. If we were ranking volcanic eruptions on a scale from 1 to 10, these eruptions would rank a 6 or 7. Not that terrible, but still worth 10 to 17 million in damages. However, these numbers are nothing compared to Alaska's 1988 Redoubt eruption, another volcano that erupted and summed up a staggering $345 million in damages. Mainly because its ashes hit aircraft engines, such as the KLM 747 that lost power after all its engines went off due to the ashes. If people weren't paying attention to Alaska's unstable geology before that, well, they surely started to after it. When you think of the hazards of volcanic activity, the first thing that might possibly pop in your mind is Pompeii, Italy. Of course, that's the worst-case scenario, a city being engulfed by lava. Spur may seem innocent compared to Vesuvio, but it still took its toll. The last time it erupted in the 90s, and it threw volcanic aerosols over 60,000 feet into the atmosphere. Let's get our science straight here. Think of volcanic aerosols like liquid particles that are released into the atmosphere during an eruption. These particles are usually created when gases from a volcano, such as sulfur dioxide, combine with water and other particles that exist in our atmosphere. These aerosols can actually cool the Earth's surface since they reflect sunlight directly back into space. And that's not the worst part. It can stay in the atmosphere for several years after an eruption, causing lots of health issues. The eruption unleashed blazing fast avalanches of hot gas and ash called pyroclastic flows, along with thick, muddy floods known as lahars. Oh, and there were also the massive volcanic boulders. These rock chunks were huge, some over 3 feet long, and they blasted out from the volcano like nature's cannonballs, landing more than 6 miles away. All that volcanic heat melted part of a nearby glacier, kicking off debris flows that dammed up the Chakachatna River and created a whole new lake along the valley. Some good came out of Spur's first eruption, though. The main lesson was, volcanic monitoring pays off. The local monitoring was able to reduce the economic damage done by the eruption, especially for a city that has an intense air traffic. Spur is deemed as dormant for the moment. but it could go off anytime soon. You see, volcanoes are classified as active, dormant, or extinct, depending on how much action they're putting on. If it's still active, it's still rumbling and erupting somewhat regularly. Dormant means it's had some recent activity, but it's still lying low for now. And extinct, that's when it's been quiet for such a long time that we figure it's done for good. One of the US's most dangerous active volcanoes is Mount St. Helens. This volcano is actually responsible for the most powerful eruption in US history. Its last blast was so intense, it threw off about 1,300 feet off its summit. Basically, the top of the mountain vanished, and if you thought Mount Spur's ash cloud was impressive, St. Helens wins the competition since it launched its ashes 80,000 feet into the sky. Eastern Washington plunged into total darkness. But it wasn't just that. In a matter of 3 minutes, the eruption hurled 3.7 billion cubic yards of blazing rock and dust, enough to fill 1 million Olympic-sized pools across 230 square miles of lush forest. Actually, the earthquakes that anticipated the eruption started weeks before May 18, 1980. A ground shake of magnitude 5.0 went off, triggering a landslide on one side of the volcano. By the end of the official eruption date, 57 people had lost their lives. Nearly 7,000 big game animals like deer and elk were wiped out, and millions of birds laid scattered on the burnt earth. Researchers don't think St. Helens will blow at the same magnitude again anytime soon, but they're keeping an eye on it, because this volcano is not exactly finished. By the way, the word volcano comes from the Roman name Vulcan, which was the Roman deity of fire, and they often happen at the meeting point of tectonic plates, which are the pieces of the Earth's surface that fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. The so-called Ring of Fire, located in the Pacific Ocean, is the world's danger zone when it comes to volcanoes. It contains between 750 and 915 active volcanoes. The largest volcano located in the Ring of Fire, also the largest active volcano in the world, is the Mauna Loa. It's over 13,000 feet high, and it's located in Hawaii. Researchers say that Mauna Loa has been erupting for at least 700,000 years. Its most recent eruption began on the 27th of November 2022, and it lasted until December 13th. It's been quiet since the 80s until it decided to wake up again. Thanks to constant monitoring by the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, it didn't cause any casualties when it last erupted. Scientists have been investing big time on volcanic monitoring, not only to reduce economic hazards, but also to save lives. The most recent attempt has been to drill into volcanoes. Recently, a group of scientists went all the way to Iceland in one of the world's volcanic hotspots. There are around 33 active volcanoes in Iceland alone, but the one that is the most interesting to them the most is the Krafla volcano. The Krafla has erupted around 30 times in the last 1,000 years, and its most recent eruption was in the mid-1980s. The project, named Krafla Magma Testbed, or KMT for short, is hoping to advance the understanding of how magma behaves underground. The main advantage of this drilling research is predicting the risk of eruptions, but it can also help to push geothermal energy forward. I mean, can you imagine having electricity that is run by the limitless source of volcano power? The KMT team will begin drilling holes deep into volcanic ground in 2027. They're aiming at reaching over a mile into the ground. After all, it's different to monitor lava activity when it's on the surface than when it is still below ground. This will allow researchers to listen to the pulse of the Earth, according to them. They're saying this research is as revolutionary as the first time man went to the moon. Oh, and speaking of that, I was shocked to discover that volcanoes exist all throughout the solar system. Yep, other planets and moons have volcanoes too. The largest volcano in our solar system is Olympus Mons on Mars. It's a shield volcano, much like the ones that make up the Hawaiian Islands. It's about 370 miles wide. If we transported it all the way back to Earth, it would almost occupy all of Poland. Yikes.
You'd be surprised to find out the life-changing discoveries a person can make just by browsing Google Maps. Like this guy, who found a suspicious crater and might have made a major scientific discovery. In 2024, Canadian Joël Lupoint was planning a casual camping trip in his homeland. He opened Google Earth and zoomed in Quebec's Côte Nord region. That's when he saw it, this unusual rounded structure. The measurement was impressive, 9.3 miles from one point to another, and there seemed to be a lake next to it. He was quick to print the screen and sent the image to a French geophysicist to see if he knew anything about it. Most times these images turn out to be nothing, or simply Google Earth watermarks. But he was surprised when he opened his email and saw the scientist's reply. The geophysicist said that, judging by the looks of the topography, Lapointe could have discovered a meteor impact area. Now, impact areas are really hard to identify. Since they've been around for millions of years, most of their shapes have been heavily changed by erosion. Scientists call these areas impact structures. They're usually circular or crater-like and are made up of deformed bedrock. It happens when a meteor falls into the surface of the Earth. Here's the thing. Since the crater has huge walls around it, these areas are usually mistaken for mountain ranges. That's what left the Canadian explorer confused. But the French geophysicist that analyzed the case gave him hope. That weird formation in Quebec had been classified as a type of volcanic formation. After Lapointe brought this subject back to the agenda, scientists had to dig a little deeper to find the truth. Until this recent discovery, scientists thought the area looked like that due to some volcanic formation. This is actually normal, since other things such as volcanism and sinkholes can be mistaken for impact craters. To verify, they asked for some samples of the site. This is a more reliable way to fact-check whether a meteor landed there or not. When the meteor hits the Earth, it brings different types of minerals from outer space. That's the wonderful thing about impact craters. They reveal a link between Earth and the outside universe. By now, scientists have cataloged most of the minerals that are native to our planet. When they're searching for an impact structure, they usually look for things such as teenite and chemisite, which can only be found in meteors. The biggest known impact crater in the world is the Vredefort crater, located in South Africa. This big thing was formed some 4 billion years ago. The asteroid that made it is estimated to have been one of the largest ever to strike planet Earth. When the researchers got the results of the site back in Canada, they did confirm that it contained zircon, a mineral that tends to show areas of impact. There's no way to guarantee that Lapointe really found an impact crater, but scientists are organizing a research mission over to the area just to make sure. If it turns out that it really is an impact crater, that's pretty huge news, since the last discovery was made in 2013. Another one of these mesmerizing discoveries came from a 15-year-old boy. William Goddery was also a Canadian, and for some reason loved looking for long-lost Mayan cities. Different from the previous story, William had an intention and a research methodology. He had studied many books on Mayan civilizations. He believed that Mayans built their cities in relation to the stars in the sky. So he opened a book and mapped all the cities that have already been unearthed. And that's when he noticed something important. There is an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. He thought to himself, could this mean there is a lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? William Goddery is known to be a science genius and has even won an award for this constellation theory. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to search Google Earth for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. Advances in satellite tech have shed new light on long-lost Mayan cities such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. He had hopes, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency to verify what he had found. Since he had already won awards for his research, he had friends in high places. And that's when things got interesting. According to the images, there was a large square area on the border of Mexico and Belize that looked like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. William named the new city he discovered as Mouth of Fire. However, his theory was very much contested inside the archaeological community, and many Mayan experts worked to debunk William's findings. Experts say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Renowned anthropologists and astronomers said William's methodology was an act of creative imagination. Still, a 15-year-old teen almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. What about these tiny dots that appeared on images of Google Earth? These strange spotted circles were found in the middle of the Algerian desert. A YouTuber browsing on Google Earth found these circles and discovered that people had been debating over their origin for years. He thought they were a glitch from satellite images. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. They're far away from any town, road, or human activity, making it hard to understand if it was man-made or just a natural phenomenon. To settle this mystery, he interviewed the people who took Google Earth's pictures. He found out they were 100% true. The circles were there in real life. They appear in multiple pictures from multiple years. Now, at first, he guessed they were the result of oil activity. Algeria is a rich area for natural resources, so this made sense. To find out if the area is worth extracting, companies usually undertake seismic surveys. They're a way of analyzing the Earth's surface by sending shock waves into the ground. Depending on how these waves bounce back, you'll know it is located underground. There was another possibility. The Sahara is a very dry area of the planet. The average high temperatures in summer are over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. To survive there, people need to find ways of accessing water. So his second guess was that the circles were a kind of ruin or leftover from ancient water wells. But when he talked to an expert, he found out they weren't ancient water wells. You can see some of these traditional constructions in other cities on Google Earth, and they look really different from the mysterious circles. He decided to travel over to Algeria to find out the truth. He drove 99 miles into the heart of the desert, and when he gets there, he sees it, a huge crater dug on the sand surrounded by 12 smaller holes. It kind of looked like the ancestor of a modern clock. There, he found something he couldn't spot on Google Earth: thin metal wires. When the curious YouTuber and his teams started to dig in the sand, they found old dynamite and some sardine cans. Apparently, they were hiding the truth. The Sahara Circles, as they were famously called, were not the historical leftovers of seismic surveying. Back at the time when these circles were made, this technology didn't even exist, but they were sure related to oil exploration. The dynamite holes were an ancient method of oil searching, and the sardine cans? Well, they were left by the workers who were exploring the region. Another Google Earth mystery solved.
This sleek, state-of-the-art submarine named Run was sent to explore the depths of Antarctica. But as soon as it discovered something, it mysteriously disappeared. So, what happened? It all started when scientists wanted to explore one of the most remote and mysterious places on Earth, the Dotson Ice Shelf in West Antarctica. This ice shelf, silent giant, stretches 30 miles wide. That's almost the length of New York City. It stands between two icy promontories, the Martin and Bear Peninsulas, and it hides an entire world of geological mysteries. If you think that Antarctica is nothing but a desert of super thick snow and ice, you're wrong. There are entire landscapes hidden deep down there. The underside of the Dotson Ice Shelf is a rugged, dynamic terrain shaped by the slow, relentless forces of nature. There are towering ice formations, deep troughs, and bizarre structures stretching for hundreds of feet. Scientists are super curious about it, but as you can imagine, this landscape isn't easy to explore at all. To find out more, we have to scan the area with satellites or try drilling through the snow. trying to collect the big picture, piece by piece. But these methods only gave us vague hints. The real breakthrough happened when scientists came up with the idea to let the submarines explore it. Autonomous submersibles could swoop deep into the icy waters beneath the Dodson ice shelf and tell us what's up down there. These robotic explorers have fantastic advanced sonar systems. It's that thing that bats or dolphins do. They can use sound to see the world. Basically, they send out sound waves underwater, and when those waves hit something like the ice shelf above or the seafloor below, they bounce back to the system. Animals feel how long it took for the sound waves to return and how they changed. And this helped them understand what's located where. For example, clicks that dolphins send out tell them where the fish are. We copied this crazy evolutionary trick and adapted it to our underwater exploration. Only our version is much cooler, with a higher level of precision, so we created detailed maps of the environment. The Rand submarine was one of those robotic explorers. It was named after the Norse deity of the sea. Run had been meticulously programmed to navigate a treacherous landscape of Antarctica. But even with all this training, its journey led to an unexpected and eerie end. In 2019, Ran was sent to explore the depths beneath the Dodson ice shelf. It was a hero, the first one to go on a mission like this. The team said it was like seeing the other side of the moon. For 27 straight days, it worked tirelessly. It traveled over 620 miles beneath the thick ice. That's like a journey from Paris to Berlin. Ran went further and deeper than anyone could have imagined. At one point, it reached over 10 miles into the glacier's belly, and what it discovered down there was astonishing. Scientists thought there would be some smooth, uniform ice surfaces, but Ran revealed an underside marked by huge cracks, ridges. There were formations that looked like sand dunes, frozen in time. And finally, it found some mysterious swirling and teardrop-shaped patterns. They all looked more like art than geology. This actually tells the story of ice shelves and the ocean around it. Warm water sneaks in under the ice and melts it from below. Sometimes it smooths the ice out, but other times it carves out these weird, uneven shapes that look like patterns and drawings. And some of these shapes are huge, over 1,300 feet long. That's about 3.5 football fields. The reason why they look like swirling doodles is because the Earth spins. It makes the water turn in special ways, bending the shapes and drawing these spirals. It's called the Coriolis effect. Imagine you were on a merry-go-round and tried to throw something like a ball. It would go in a curve, not a straight line. Same thing happens with the water on Earth. Later, scientists found similar patterns in other Antarctic ice shelves, though they weren't as epic as the ones under Dodson. But Ran also discovered something horrifying. Turns out that these warm waters, aside from being great artists, are also a huge danger. The Dodson ice shelf isn't just hanging out serenely on the sea. It's part of a very delicate system and acts as a protective barrier that holds back huge glaciers in West Antarctica. The ice shelf is floating on the ocean, but it's still connected to the land. As warm water sneaks underneath it and the ice melts, the Dodson can't hold on to the land as tightly anymore. The protective barrier starts to weaken, and this lets the glaciers behind it move faster into the ocean. When those glaciers flow into the sea, they add more water, which could cause sea levels to rise, eventually changing our coastlines. Rand stumbled upon huge pockets where the ice was melting at alarming rates, all due to powerful underwater currents. It was like seeing a ticking clock on the glacier. The stakes were high, but luckily the submarine was ready. This time, it managed to return. And then, it worked for 5 more years, helping scientists with tons of useful data. The missions were daunting. There could be periods where Rand slipped into the pitch-black cavity beneath the glaciers, spending 24 hours without communication. But it was mapping every peak and every valley. It gained experience from over 40 missions below ice. Then, in early 2024, Rand went on a mission to the Thwaites Glacier. The mission was bold from the start. This place is also ominously referred to as the Doomsday Glacier. It's called that because it's slowly melting and has the potential to raise sea levels worldwide if it collapses, causing catastrophes everywhere. That's why RAN was dispatched to explore its underbelly, a place that had never been mapped so intricately before. The idea was to uncover the glacier's secrets, study how rapidly it was melting and why. This was RAN's second time exploring Thwaites. During the previous visit, it became the first sub to ever map the glacier's underside. RAN was exploring the depths from 650 feet to 1,650 feet. It sent a lot of data about how the Doomsday Glacier was slowly melting due to warm ocean currents. But while venturing into these icy depths, something went wrong. Out of nowhere, RAN vanished, without warning, without a trace. One moment it was sending back crucial data, and the next it had slipped into the abyss. No distress signals, no final transmission, and it didn't return to the point it was supposed to. People sent extensive searches, helicopters soared overhead, drones buzzed through the frozen skies, but no sign of the submersible emerged from the glacier's grasp. After a while, RAN's batteries would certainly run away, so at this point, it had definitely been swallowed by the abyss beneath 1,500 feet of ice. That was a huge and sad loss for the scientific team. The scientists at the University of Gothenburg are now looking to replace RAN and continue their important research under Thwaites. To this day, scientists have no idea what happened to it. Some say it may have been trapped in the ice. Others believe it was pulled away by an unseen current. It also might have collided with something unexpected. Whatever the truth is, its disappearance has left scientists stunned, and it looks like the ice shelf will hold on to its secrets a little longer. At least we gained a treasure trove of knowledge from RAN's journey. Scientists keep exploring Antarctica, looking for history that hides under the snow. For example, they discovered that around 90 million years ago, a lush temperate rainforest thrived near the South Pole. They revealed an ancient world far warmer than they ever imagined. Deep in Antarctica, they unearthed fossilized roots, pollen, and spores preserved in the soil. All this shows that there was a swampy rainforest that flourished despite months of polar darkness. All these discoveries changed our understanding of Earth's climate, both in the past and the future.
There is a powerful force hiding underground where tectonic plates meet, and one forces another under it. This happens in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Strain builds over centuries. The tension is unbearable until the megathrust awakens. The Earth shakes with a magnitude that can exceed 9 points, more powerful than any other earthquake. When the seafloor suddenly gets pushed up fast, it sends a huge ripple across the water, and a tsunami of huge force is out. These waves are called teletsunamis, and they cross entire ocean basins, ready to take over coastlines thousands of miles away. The thrust fault stretches over 600 miles. The Earth is not just shaking, it feels like it's tearing apart. This is the power of a megathrust earthquake. Those caught in its path will have to fight for their lives. Japanese authorities recently had to issue their first ever megaquake advisory. It happened because of a strong tremor on the edge of the Nankai Trough ocean floor zone. In the end, most of the warnings were lifted, and there wasn't much damage from the 7.1 magnitude earthquake. Parts of southwestern Japan started to shake, and the superfast trains in Japan slowed down to stay safe, which made travel slower for everyone. But everyone is staying alert as they know about the risk of a megathrust earthquake that could happen within the next few decades in the Nankai Trough. The tectonic plate under the Philippine Sea is slowly sliding underneath the land where Japan is, moving just a few inches every year. The last big earthquakes from this area happened in 1944 and 1946, both with a magnitude of 8.1. These quakes have caused a lot of destruction in the country. The next megathrust earthquake in the region, if it does happen, could be between a magnitude 8 and 9. Scientists still can't agree on how likely this mega earthquake is to happen, but it could be up to 80% certainty. On the other side of the Pacific, Scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey have studied a dangerous area along the U.S. West Coast. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and it stretches from northern California to northern Vancouver Island in Canada. Over the past 14,200 years, there have likely been at least 30 big earthquakes in this region. One major quake happens every 500 years on average. But for a long time now, Cascadia has been quiet, and it worries scientists. They think this might be because the area is locked, meaning the tectonic plates are stuck together and building up a lot of pressure. Eventually, the part of the seafloor could suddenly break and move by several feet. The shaking would be just 5 minutes, but it would create a powerful tsunami as the seafloor shifts that would last for 10 hours. If it happens, it's going to be the worst natural disaster in the country's history, according to experts. The ground on some inland hills could turn into something like quicksand. This would cause the hillsides to slide and crumble, taking down roads and bridges. Around 620,000 buildings could be badly damaged or even collapse, including about 100 hospitals and 2,000 schools. People in Washington state might have to take care of themselves without help for 2 weeks, finding food, water, and shelter on their own. Scientists are studying slow slip events, where the tectonic plates move very slowly over weeks or months, releasing some energy but not enough to stop a big one. Every time the magnitude of an earthquake goes up by just one number, the energy it releases is 40 times bigger. So we'd need about 1 million small earthquakes every day for 500 years straight to release the same energy as one huge magnitude 9 earthquake. But these small earthquakes might be clues that a bigger earthquake is coming. To better monitor the Cascadia Fault, experts are mapping the fault more accurately and adding better monitoring tools offshore. Scientists receive over $10 million to install seismic sensors and seafloor pressure gauges on a fiber optic cable off the coast of Oregon. The goal is to be ready to warn people and potentially save lives when a big earthquake strikes. A sharp megathrust earthquake happened in this part of the world in 1964. It went down in history as the Great Alaska Earthquake and had a magnitude of 9.2. It lasted for more than 4 minutes, making it the most powerful earthquake in the history of the U.S. and North America. The ground shook so hard that it caused huge cracks and landslides. In Anchorage, many houses, buildings, and roads were destroyed because they weren't built to handle such a big earthquake. In some places, the land was permanently changed. For example, the coastline near Kodiak and Hinchinbrook Island was lifted by 30 feet. In other areas, like Gerwood and Portage, the ground sank by 8 feet. They had to rebuild roads higher so they wouldn't be flooded by the tide. A huge 27-foot tsunami wiped out the entire village of Chiniga. Many coastal towns were heavily damaged, not just by the earthquake, but also by tsunamis and the fires that followed. After the main earthquake, there were thousands of smaller aftershocks for months. A moderate earthquake of magnitude 4.4 shook Los Angeles in August 2024. Once it was over, the LA Fire Department checked around the city and didn't find any major damage or anyone hurt. In the nearby city of Pasadena, which is close to the earthquake's epicenter, a water pipe burst inside City Hall and everyone had to leave the building. Thankfully, there was no danger of a tsunami. The best we can do to avoid panic in such situations is to be prepared. Japan is one of the places on Earth where earthquakes happen the most because it sits on the edges of 4 tectonic plates. Around 1,500 of these earthquakes each year are noticeable. Because of this, the people in Japan have learned to live with earthquakes. The 1950 law set a rule that buildings should be able to handle earthquakes up to a magnitude 7 without falling apart. An update 30 years later said that buildings should only have minor damage in such earthquakes and still work as usual. But if an earthquake is even stronger, the law says the building's main job is to not collapse and save people's lives. At the most basic level, buildings are made stronger with thicker beams, pillars, and walls so they can handle shaking better. Another technique is placing special pads made from materials like rubber at the base of a building. Some buildings are even built on thick layers of padding that separate them from the ground completely, which helps protect them during an earthquake. A skyscraper might sway back and forth a lot, moving up to 5 feet. To stop it from getting damaged, engineers can add something called dampers every second floor all the way to the top. These dampers are like giant bicycle pumps, but instead of air, they're filled with liquid. When the building shakes, the dampers push against the liquid inside them. Even though the liquid doesn't squish very much, it can still absorb some of the shaking. When they're building tall skyscrapers, engineers try to make the structure as simple and balanced as possible. This means having each floor the same height and placing the support columns evenly. But sometimes, architects who design skyscrapers don't want to make these compromises because they have creative ideas for how the building should look. Then they have to find compromise solutions. For example, Tokyo's Skytree Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the world, is designed in a futuristic style but also includes special features to protect it from earthquakes. It has a central pillar, like in traditional Japanese pagodas, and seismic dampers that help absorb the energy from an earthquake, keeping the building safe.
You're down in one of those polar seas where the Brinicle, eerily called the Finger of Death, is born. It's a strange, almost otherworldly place, the deep ocean, where light barely reaches. Everything down there seems to have adapted to survive in darkness and intense cold. But even those truly hardy creatures aren't ready for what a Brinicle can do. When that briny, supercooled water starts dripping down, a ghost story begins. The formation of these brinicles is a fascinating process, like an underwater science experiment happening in real time. We know that when seawater freezes, it doesn't freeze like fresh water. Because of all the salt in it, it has to push out impurities to form the pure ice that floats at the top. This means the salty water, or brine, ends up trapped in channels and pockets within the ice. When it sees the light of day for the first time, a brinicle resembles a pipe of ice reaching down from the underside of a layer of sea ice. At first, a brinicle is very fragile and its walls are thin. But the continuous flow of colder brine supports the growth of the brinicle. It also prevents it from melting. Otherwise, this process would be inevitable, caused by the brinicle's contact with less cold surrounding water. As the ice accumulates and the walls become thicker, the brinicle becomes more stable. Over time, the brine trapped inside gets squeezed out through tiny cracks, dripping down in this cold, heavy plume. Once that cold brine starts flowing downward, it begins freezing the seawater around it into a sheath of ice. That's why, instead of melting as it hits the water below, it forms this icy casing that protects it, helping it grow longer and stronger. The brinicle keeps moving forward inch by inch, and this crazy downward spiral is almost unstoppable. And when it touches down on the seafloor, that's when the trouble begins for anything living nearby. Imagine being one of those creatures on the seafloor, maybe a sea star or an unsuspecting urchin just trying to make it through the day. And all of a sudden, you see this icy tentacle nearing you. It isn't just some cold water coming down. It's basically a net of ice moving down and spreading out. There's no escape, no way to predict its coming, and no chance for survival. It's a slow-motion natural disaster in action. When a brinicle reaches the seafloor, it continues to accumulate ice while the surrounding water freezes over. The brine keeps traveling across the seafloor in a downslope direction. Once it reaches the lowest possible point, it stops and pools. But don't let the danger distract you from how beautiful brinicles are. Well, in their own creepy way. They look like something you'd see in a dream. Elegant, twisting ice tubes reaching down, perfectly symmetrical, and totally random. Filming a brinicle is no easy task because they're delicate when they first form. Just the motion from a nearby current or a sudden change in temperature can snap them off, ending the show before it really starts. So, scientists who managed to capture brinicles on film in 2011 actually got incredibly lucky. It was the first time the world got to see this icy finger descending and freezing everything it touched, and it changed our understanding of polar ecosystems. Brinicles can reach quite impressive sizes. Sometimes they can stretch for several feet. Their size depends on the conditions of the water and ice above. The slower the water movement and the colder the temperature, the bigger and stronger a brinicle can grow. But if the water's too deep or if there's too much movement in the current, the brinicle is likely to break apart. It needs just the right balance to survive long enough to touch down and freeze over the ocean floor. For creatures living on the seafloor, brinicles are like invisible booby traps, only instead of avoiding a net, they're avoiding an expanding ice cage. Starfish and sea urchins might not have big brains, but they have a basic survival instinct to crawl away from danger. Sadly, with brinicles, they're usually caught completely off guard. One second they're minding their own business, the next, an icy sheet is closing in around them, trapping them where they are and freezing them almost instantly. It's hard not to feel sympathy for these creatures, right? You watch footage of a brinicle in action and you see a starfish just stopping. One moment it's moving slowly along the sand, and then it's frozen in place, totally helpless. It's like watching a train wreck in slow-mo. Luckily, brinicles present danger only to smaller marine life forms like sea urchins and starfish. Bigger animals like seals or whales, or humans who happen to go diving in the ocean at the frigid poles, brinicles are totally harmless. At the same time, for scientists, this tough natural phenomenon offers a fascinating insight into how life adapts, or fails to adapt for that matter, in extreme environments. And it gets even better. A brinicle might just be the perfect setup for life to begin. Researchers are now looking at these super salty ice tubes as not just fatal traps, but potentially as sources of life. This theory isn't just science fiction, it's rooted in actual research. Here's how it goes. The brine channels in sea ice are full of tiny, confined spaces. Those are exactly the kind of places where chemicals can get trapped, concentrated, and start interacting in interesting ways. It's like setting up a mini-lab where the building blocks of life can come together and create something new. Scientists think this process of salt rejection in sea ice could have actually helped the first bits of life appear. Some researchers even think that this process might be happening right now on icy moons like Europa, Ganymede, or Enceladus, where there might have been frozen seas beneath thick ice layers. Just imagine it, brinicles forming in other worlds of our solar system, laying down the foundations for extraterrestrial life, and all thanks to the same icy process that creates these fingers of death here on Earth. One way scientists describe brinicles is by comparing them to chemical gardens. Have you ever done one of those experiments where you mix metal salts into a solution and watch them produce plant-like structures? Well, you can observe a similar chemical process when a brinicle is in action. In the cold, saline-rich brine of a brinicle, certain reactions could kick off to create amino acids or other building blocks of life. It's wild to think that something so dangerous could have also helped shape our world, or could be creating other forms of life elsewhere. In both cases, whether on Earth or another planet, these icy chemical reactions might be the first step toward the formation of simple life forms. It's a kind of alchemy, where ice and salt water mix to create something more than the sum of their parts. This is one reason why scientists are so eager to study brinicles. Each one could hold a tiny clue about how life begins, survives, or fails under extreme conditions. Something as mesmerizing and weird, but at the same time simple as brinicles, hints at bigger questions. How did life start on Earth? What are the conditions needed for life to survive in extreme environments? Could icy structures like these exist in other parts of our solar system or beyond, creating similar conditions that might one day give rise to alien life? As much as they look like a silent threat reaching out from the ice, brinicles are also reminders of how beautifully complex and interconnected our world is. They may seem like simple fingers of ice, but they hold secrets that touch on everything from ecology to chemistry to the origins of life itself. So next time you hear about the ocean, remember that deep below in the darkest, coldest waters, something incredible and a little bit terrifying is happening right at this moment.
Scientists claim that Icelandia was a region between Greenland and Scandinavia that was more than 230,000 square miles, but is now underwater. The Earth was once a large pizza pie, with all the continents connected to each other millions of years ago, otherwise known as Pangaea. The North Atlantic region we know today was dry land from about 335 million to 175 million years ago. For many years, scientists and geologists assumed that the North Atlantic Ocean was birthed as Pangaea began to split apart roughly 200 million years ago. With volcanoes in the region where Iceland is, the country came to be just 60 million years ago as it broke off and sailed away from all the other lands. And since the Earth was like a large pizza pie, it divided like one. Many of the lands split up into many large and small pieces, creating the continents we know today. But this new theory suggests that the result of Pangaea's splitting left out some land that stretched for around 200 miles. And just about 10 million years ago, that piece of land submerged in the waters on the eastern and western side, leaving the tip of the land, which is now Iceland. When plate tectonics move, they grind on each other, which gave shape to our current landscape, all thanks to the mantle. This new radical theory goes against everything written in history books and what scientists have been studying. They began shaking heads, drawing lots of skepticism and criticism. But by analyzing the ocean floor under Iceland and the Earth's crust, we can assume that this idea isn't far-fetched. The crust beneath Iceland happens to be a lot thicker than the typical ones. Oceanic crust is made up of unique melted rocks compared to the land crusts where we walk and live on, and is a lot more denser. The thinnest layer on Earth is the crust, where life takes place. It's essential for water, growing food, gathering natural resources and minerals, and breathing in oxygen. It sinks below to the bottom, but right above the Earth's mantle. It also refreshes itself, since it constantly gets recycled into the mantle and back up. This is why the rocks in the oceanic crust are around 25 miles thick, compared to just 5 miles anywhere else. This is also reasonable given that it's in a hotspot for volcanoes. Magnetic surveys of the ocean floor show layers of molten crust in stripe patterns. Also, given the fact that the Earth's magnetic field changed its polarity over millions of years, it played a role in shaping the foundation of our landscape. But there isn't any concrete evidence to prove this new theory just yet. One of the first steps is to start digging the ocean floor near Iceland. Zircon is a very sturdy mineral that can last for billions of years despite erosion in the Earth's crust. By taking samples and studying them, researchers can estimate the geological age of the continents. This will make sure the crust is oceanic, which is thicker, or continental, which is the regular crust we walk on. This isn't an overnight project and would come with a hefty cost. Another way is to do seismic surveys that can measure echoes conducted on research ships. Drilling holes miles deep in the crust can also help with the research. But this would cost more than studying the zircon minerals. Some fossilized plants unique to both Scandinavia and Greenland might prove that Icelandia was once on the surface and possibly scattered with trees. It wasn't a cold land as it is today, so it may have had forests. But scientists still haven't found fossil evidence of animals common in both lands to suggest anything. But maybe time will tell. The theory goes deeper, which suggests that there was a Greater Icelandia. With Iceland, Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, and Greenland all in one microcontinent, it could be a destination of winter enthusiasts and great for skiing. It could be possible to connect Canada to Greater Icelandia by train over the ocean, which would open up the economy even more. Iceland is around 40,000 square miles, which is already quite big. And if the Greater Icelandia was present today, then Europe would be a completely different continent. Many theories are circulating about other possible hidden microcontinents around the world. Scientists aren't certain of the possibility of Icelandia's existence, but if all the studies conducted were done correctly, then the theory could change everything we know about Iceland and the North Atlantic Ocean. And this could pave the way for other sunken microcontinents around the world. Another theory out there is that New Zealand was the tip of a lost subcontinent, even bigger than Icelandia, called Zealandia. Studies show that it's separated from the supercontinent Gondwana between 79 to 83 million years ago. Scientists claim that it's the thinnest and youngest continent discovered underwater. Craton is a core rock that acts as the main foundation for most continents. It's at least 1 billion years old, but the continental crust that makes up Zealandia is just half of that, which makes it quite young. That means some Craton is missing, even though it holds some leftovers of older rocks and parts of the mantle. They're estimated to be as old as 2.7 billion years old. Scientists did some studies on the zircon crystals from New Zealand and found out that they're as old as 1.3 billion years old. The rest of the continents are more than 3 billion years old. Scientists studied the composition of the rocks in the bottom of the ocean around New Zealand. They're made up of silica and granite, which are found in continental crusts. The ocean floors mainly have magnesium and iron-rich rocks. They're also thicker and higher than regular ocean crusts around it. They conducted some studies and collected magnetic and topographic data to see the link between the Tasman and Coral Seas in the Kato Trough region. This is the narrow strip between Zealandia and Australia. Satellite data tracked tiny faults in the Earth's gravity to map out the crust of the ocean floor surrounding the area. They saw the mass that makes up Zealandia quite visible and almost the size of Australia. Even though the signs are there, this doesn't prove anything. It's possible that there are a bunch of microcontinents which all split apart when Australia broke free of Gondwana. Back then, the supercontinent was made up of South America, Antarctica, Australia, Zealandia, Arabia, and the Indian subcontinent. New Zealand is already not the biggest country out there, but if the theories are correct, then Zealandia will be 6 times its original size. Mauritius is a young island that's only a few million years old. Just 1,200 miles off the coast of Africa, it's believed that the tiny island came to life around 9 million years ago. The underwater volcanoes in the region spewed out so much lava that it formed the land today. But scientists found zircon rocks that are more than 3 billion years old. It may also be part of a continent submerged underwater called Mauritia, which is just a quarter of the size of Madagascar. The zircons they found were embedded in solid rocks and not just in the sand, which may rule out that they just washed up on shore from another continent. Some scientists are still not convinced. They suggest that discovering rocks that stand out from the other typical ones brought by an eruption could skew the scientific community to this theory. But just like how Icelandia could be part of Greater Icelandia, Mauritia was once called Rodinia, which consisted of India and Madagascar. Theories suggest that Mauritia was covered in water when India broke away from Madagascar, something like 85 million years ago.
Phew, you could finally send that last report for the day and breathe out. The weekend is around the corner, but just when you're about to hit send, you're alarmed by the low rumbling under your desk. Is it the light rail passing by? Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's a volcano speaking. What, here? In Arizona? That's right, the ground keeps shifting under Arizona, reminding us that Earth is alive. No panic though, let's arm ourselves with some context. 20 American states have extinct, active, and dormant, currently sleeping, volcanoes. Among such states, you can find California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. On the bright side, Arizona's volcanoes are dormant at the moment. but it doesn't mean they won't go off in the near or not so near future. Now, how about traveling to Arizona to check the traces of its active volcanic past? They dot the desert landscapes of this state like spots dot a Dalmatian. There are entire volcanic fields southwest of Phoenix, east of Douglas, near Flagstaff, north of Kingman, and near the Mexico border. The most worrying thing about these fields is that even though they're not active at the moment, eruptions in this region might happen every 1,000 years or so. Well, the time seems to be up. The last powerful and destructive volcanic eruption occurred around 1,000 years ago at the Sunset Crater. Oh, this place is worth paying more attention to. And we will, but a bit later. First, we have to talk about hotspots. No, not that place where you can surf the web. In our volcanic context, a hotspot is a place where insane amounts of heat melt the overlying crust, Earth's thin outer layer, and form volcanoes. This heat rises from the mantle, which is located between our planet's dense, superheated core and the crust. Want to see an example of this type of volcanism? Welcome to the Hawaiian Islands. The Big Island has its active volcanoes because, at the moment, it's situated on top of the Hawaiian hotspot. The older Hawaiian Islands were once there too, but later they drifted off towards the northwest. It happened because that's where the oceanic crust on top of which they sat, namely the Pacific Plate, moved. Now, look at the world's ocean basins. Yes, they're literally dotted with islands that sit on top of hotspots, like Hawaii, Iceland, Samoa, the Galapagos. Those are probably the most famous examples. But don't think that continents can't host hotspots. They can, but those are far less common. One of the most famous continental hotspots is, I bet you know it. Yep, the one beneath the Yellowstone caldera. By the way, the caldera is a vast volcanic crater, especially one formed as a result of a massive eruption that led to the collapse of the mouth of a volcano. The Yellowstone hotspot is basically the creator of Old Faithful and the rest of the hot springs and mud pots for which the national park is famous. Speaking of Old Faithful, let's make a small detour and pay more attention to this wonder of nature. It's one of the most well-known geysers in the world. People have been coming from all over the globe to see it for more than a century. The cool thing about this geyser is that the likes of it can only form under very specific conditions. That's why they're pretty rare. Magma under the surface superheats pockets of underground water. The pressure there keeps growing until it eventually pushes the water upward with immense strength. A certain volcanic rock with a high silica content lines the tunnel through which this water escapes. Basically, it creates a unique pipe that can withstand unbelievable pressure and heat created by the water erupting above the ground. Old Faithful was the very first named geyser in Yellowstone. If you come to visit it expecting the thing to erupt every hour on the hour, you're gonna be disappointed. On average, Old Faithful erupts every 91 minutes or so, which isn't that bad either. Plus, you can download a special app which will provide you with the approximate time of the next eruption. But be very careful while visiting and stay away from the site. The water erupting from the powerful geyser reaches 204 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam is even more scorching, up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot enough to bake a cake. But let's get back to our volcanic hotspots. Scientists still don't clearly understand why there aren't many hotspot volcanoes on continental crust. One reason might be that the continental crust is much thicker than the oceanic crust, which is about 4 times as thick on average. Another reason could be that most of Earth's crust, about 2/3 of it, is oceanic. This means that there's less continental crust for hotspots to form under. Now, I bet those of you living in Arizona will appreciate the following info. We'll talk about a volcanic field right in the heart of this state, the San Francisco Volcanic Field. That's a massive area filled with over 600 volcanoes. Yes, they're mostly small, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. They're scattered across 1,800 square miles in northern Arizona, a giant territory. Interestingly, scientists are still debating about whether this volcanic field is actually sitting on top of a hotspot. But one thing they agree upon, the volcanoes in this area get younger as you move east. And this pattern matches up with the North American plate moving west over what could be a stationary hotspot beneath the surface of our planet. Cool, huh? The volcanic hullabaloo in that area started around 6 million years ago. So, in geological terms, it's relatively young. As for the most recent eruption, it happened less than 1,000 years ago. The Sunset Crater, which I mentioned before, the one near Flagstaff, is the most famous vent from that eruption. The Sinagua people had to leave their homes at Wupatki Pueblo because of the eruption. That site is now part of the Wupatki National Monument. There, you can see how people lived in this volcanic region many years ago. If you go to explore this area, you'll notice that most of the volcanoes there are basalt cinder cones, small and steep. The Colorado Plateau has quite dry weather conditions. That's why the volcanoes haven't worn down much. Some of the best examples of those cones, like this one, called the SP crater, still look like they appeared yesterday. But look around. It's not just cinder cones. The San Francisco volcanic field also has a stratovolcano, as well as some lava domes that formed from volcanic rocks with more silica than basalt you can find in places like Hawaii. It means they're thicker and don't flow as easily. Anyway, the stratovolcano is going to be one of the most epic sights you'll come across while exploring this volcanic field. Well, not the stratovolcano itself, but the San Francisco peaks, the remains of that giant formation. They stand tall at more than 12,600 feet. That's 4.5 Burj Khalifas placed on top of one another. It makes the peaks some of the biggest landmarks in northern Arizona. They're not only stunning, but also sacred to the Native American people who have lived in the area for many generations. Now, unlike those super active volcanoes in Hawaii, the San Francisco volcanic field takes its time, thousands of years between eruptions. But you shouldn't relax just yet. Geologists say another eruption is likely to happen one day. It will probably occur in the remote eastern part of the field, away from big towns. Phew! And if that next eruption is anything like the one that formed Sunset Crater, it would be quite the show. Lava fountains and rivers of lava flowing. At the same time, the next eruption might not happen for centuries, maybe even millennia. Until then, the San Francisco volcanic field will remain a hidden gem of volcanic history, waiting for its next fiery performance. The world's largest fence spans over 3,100 miles from Queensland to South Australia. If stretched out, it could easily connect London to New York. And if you'd walk next to it, you'd need 6 months to complete the journey. It wasn't built to safeguard the Australian border. Why would it, since Aussies are just surrounded by water? It wasn't meant to protect some important building either. Its purpose is to keep some animal species away from each other. It was back in the late 1800s when Australians started building parts of this fence. They wanted to create a barrier separating the lively, bustling part of the country where cities like Melbourne and Sydney thrive from the harsh, dry outback. They used wooden posts dug deep into the ground, linked up with wire mesh standing about 6 feet tall. Some parts of the fence even have a second electrically charged layer. To make sure this fence did its job, they added some red and white lights to help guard things even at night. A team of over 20 people work full-time to keep things in check here. And every year, local authorities chip in around $750,000 to keep the construction in shape. Why all this trouble? The main reason was dingoes. These gingery, wolf-like creatures are Australia's largest carnivore mammals, and they're also apex predators. They were causing a lot of trouble to local farmers, especially in southern Queensland, where they often go after sheep. For the most part, the fence has been doing its job okay, but it's not foolproof. Some dingoes still manage to sneak through. Other times, wild camels end up crashing into it. That's because Australia has quite a massive camel population roaming around. But this man-made solution did more than locals expected. They thought there would just be fewer dingoes within the fence, but fewer dingoes mean more kangaroos. And more kangaroos mean more competition with the sheep for food. It's not just the bigger species feeling the squeeze. The smaller animals and the greenery also went through changes. With all this competition in a smaller space, locals noticed less diversity in the plant life and small animals. The soil became less nutritious over time, affecting plant growth. Plus, the fence acts as a roadblock for animal migration and seed dispersal. Even the sand dunes are feeling the effects, with less grass cover to hold things together. When scientists looked at kangaroos on both sides of the fence, they noticed that the young pups inside were lighter and tinier on average. The outsiders had bigger feet and heads for their age, and it wasn't because they were eating a different diet. The kangaroos that were stuck sharing the land with dingoes had to bulk up faster to survive. On the flip side, those inside the fence took it slower because they weren't under the same type of pressure. These had to compete with a lot of other creatures for food, so a bigger size wasn't a priority anymore. Researchers are still not sure if this difference is a quick fix or a long-term gene adaptation. What about domesticating dingoes? Wouldn't that help? Many think dingoes were once pets in Australia, but it's not known for sure. These days, they're pretty wild, just like wolves, hyenas, or coyotes. Most of them don't need packs to survive and are solitary hunters with sharp instincts built in. So taming them isn't going to be easy. Still, taking down the construction is not an option for now. Australians are so strict when it comes to making sure dingoes are kept away that they even put laws in place for people who mess up with the fence. Leaving a crossing gate open can put people behind bars for up to 3 months. Damaging the fence can cost people 6 months' worth of their freedom. It wasn't the first time Australians thought a fence could help with animal issues. Before they needed it for dingoes, they experienced a serious bunny invasion. Cute as they are, rabbits were damaging the land used for farming, so locals thought of a 3-part fence. The first one stretched all the way from Ravensthorpe in the south to Pardue Station on the Pilbara coast. It was over 1,100 miles long, making it the longest unbroken fence globally at the time. All these bunny problems could have been traced back to a man named Thomas Austin. Back in 1859, when he first came to the land down under, he thought it would be a good idea to release a few rabbits into the wild, thinking it would add a bit of charm to the place. But since rabbits aren't native to Australia, they didn't have any natural predators at the time. They're also pretty adaptive creatures, needing just some grass for feeding. They reproduce at astonishing speeds too. A mama rabbit can have 4 litters a year, with as many as 5 bunnies each. Pretty soon, their numbers boomed. By the late 1880s, the bunnies had caused so much damage that local authorities came up with a proposal. They'd offer the equivalent of almost $2 million today to anyone who could come up with a solution to this long-eared problem. Nobody claimed the prize, but a commission did gather a bit over a decade later and came up with the fence idea. Maintaining those fences was complicated. They had inspectors keeping an eye, with each one responsible for a stretch about 500 miles long. There were also these boundary riders patrolling smaller sections, using bikes at first, then switching to camels or using camels to haul buggies. They even tried using cars at one point, but they couldn't handle the rough terrain and constantly had punctured tires. In terms of its effectiveness, well, by 1902, rabbits were already hanging out on the wrong side of the fence. That's why, 4 years later, they put up another one. It worked for a while, so much so that the local authorities didn't bother helping out farmers past that second fence with rabbit netting loans. Those caught between the two fences, however, still had a rough time dealing with rabbit trouble. Soon enough, rabbits spread even over fence number 2, and it was clear the solution didn't work. In some areas, even while the fences were being built, those sneaky bunnies found their way past them. To this day, the rabbit population still sometimes puts the Australian officials through rough times. The dingo fence may be the longest one, but it's not the weirdest. The aquarium fence in Turkey might take that prize. This 164-foot aquarium fence was built to make sure the expensive villa's ocean view would be visible from every one of its levels. These days, it gathers a lot of tourists from all over the world, eager to see the variety of fish it contains, and even the octopuses. Putting up a see-through structure wasn't hard. The real challenge was connecting the aqua fence to the Aegean Sea through a buried pipeline stretching across 13,000 feet of land. This ensures water constantly flows, keeping the aquarium clean and the fish happy. To make sure no one damages the delicate fence or steals any of the fish or two, the owner also invested in security. He installed a network of 17 cameras equipped with facial recognition. Visitors are free to look and take pictures, but step too close and you're likely to trigger alarms. Another one of those weird fences is New Zealand's bra fence. If you ever find yourself through central Otago, you might stumble upon a fence adorned with bras of all kinds of shapes, sizes, and patterns. Its story takes us back to 1999, when people in the area found 4 bras mysteriously hanging on the fence near Cardrona Valley Road. Some were a bit surprised, but then others started adding their bras to the decor. Some more bras appeared and it became a must-see spot for tourists. Its popularity was so high that at times it caused traffic problems in the area.
Surprise! There's more than 7 continents on our planet. Argoland, a hidden continent, may help us understand how our planet will look in the future. To find out how it hid from us and what secrets it holds, well, you'll just have to keep watching. Ready for a mystery? Scientists have been looking for a piece of land that's been missing for over 100 million years. Not exactly newsworthy, since people search for information about our planet's history all the time. You'd think it was probably this minuscule island somewhere in the middle of an ocean. Well, you'd be wrong, because this continent used to be as big as the entire U.S. territory. For a long time, geologists have been wondering whether a massive chunk of contemporary Australia vanished into thin air. Some believed it was simply hiding somewhere on the ocean floor. But thanks to some Dutch specialists and 7 years of investigating, we now know there are bits and pieces of this lost land mixed underneath the lush jungles of Southeast Asia. The continents we see in our geography manuals these days are like scattered pieces of a puzzle. There's even a nice experiment you can conduct to see for yourself. Find a world map online and print it out. Cut out all of the continents and play around with them for a while. You'll see they all fit together. Probably the most striking thing you'll see is how South America perfectly fits near Africa. If you close up the oceans that were formed in the last 200 million years, the continents look like they form a giant letter C. And that C is what scientists call the supercontinent Pangaea. It was swimming in an ocean called Panthalassa, and the inner portion of that letter C had a smaller stretch of water called the Tethys Ocean. It is in this small ocean where things get interesting. Back in the Jurassic period, this vanished continent, which scientists started calling Argoland, vanished and left a hole in Australia, now known as the Argo-Abyssal Plain. Geologists initially believed this was all due to a process called subduction. It's when one piece of the Earth's crust dives under another and recycles it into the planet's mantle. Usually, specialists track this continental vanishing through off-scraping. That's how they figured out, for instance, that India bumped into Asia and gave us the majestic Himalayan mountains. But for Argoland, things were a bit more complicated. Bits and pieces were popping up in places like Myanmar and Indonesia, but they behaved like these time-traveling relics, looking way older than when Argoland supposedly separated from Australia. It immediately raised the question, if one continent can behave so weirdly, how many others are out there doing the same? Thankfully, scientists have now put together the entire timeline of Argoland and figured out its mystery. It didn't sink or get swallowed up. It simply transformed into an archipelago, breaking into smaller pieces, called microcontinents, and floating away from Australia. These mini-continents then took a little journey before settling down in Southeast Asian jungles. This discovery fits right into the whole Pangea puzzle. It helps us better understand how continents break up and make up, all in one discovery, revealing secrets of biodiversity and climate back from in the day. If you'd like to find out more secrets about history, civilization, or random day-to-day objects, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Like, for instance, the mystery behind this invisible species line in Indonesia. It's called the Wallace Line, named after the British explorer Alfred Russel Wallace. Over 150 years ago, Wallace was on a journey around the Malay archipelago, visiting thousands of islands. What he found was that animals on one side of this invisible line were considerably different from ones on the other side. This invisible line is like a wall between marsupials and tigers, for instance, or honey-eaters and trogons. But now we know that around 35 million years ago, Australia broke up with Antarctica and collided with Asia, and this continental love triangle triggered significant changes. It didn't just change the way the land looked, it also messed with the species of animals on each side of the Wallace Line. In more recent times, a bunch of specialists published a study saying this collision and climate chaos made Asian species comfy living in the Malay archipelago. Meanwhile, the Aussie animals weren't as happy with the new environment. It was too hot and wet for some, and others just couldn't handle the tropical island lifestyle. The discovery of this continental shift towards Asia might also explain a recent finding of a human species that didn't seem to make any sense either. You see, in this hidden cave in the Philippines, archaeologists stumbled upon a new human ancestor. It seems that about 50,000 years ago, on the island of Luzon, there was this ancient human-like species. The lead researcher believed this finding was crucial for understanding human evolution in Asia, and it named this new species after the island, Homo luzonensis. Now, here's where it gets a bit confusing. The bones found by archaeologists had one small problem. They had a weird mix of traits that hadn't been seen together in any other hominid species. Smaller teeth, similar to ours, yet hands and feet that were more like our ancient humanoid ancestors. It was those throwback limbs in particular that connected this human species with the long-lost Southern Territory. That's because they have this primitive look, like these hard-to-pronounce guys, for instance. Only these two species are separated by 2 to 3 million years of time in evolution. Many have wondered, is Homo luzonensis really a new species? Not everyone is convinced. But it may also explain why living creatures are also affected by the constant shifting of the land underneath us. Now, just because they haven't changed much during our lifetime, it doesn't mean our continents will look like this forever. They evolved from this large megacontinent, and they'll most likely end up in a similar position in the future. On that note, a geologist from a European university tried to predict the future of Earth's supercontinents. As a starting point, he used an earthquake that occurred in Portugal back in 1755, when tectonic plates behaved a bit differently than they should have. After years of research, he came up with a theory in 2016. He believed that the stitches between these tectonic plates might be coming apart, setting the stage for a bigger rupture. It's like when glass cracks between two holes in a car windshield. If this happens, a subduction zone could stretch from the Mediterranean all the way up past Ireland, bringing volcanoes, earthquakes, and new mountains to these areas. If all goes according to this plan, the Atlantic Ocean will disappear, and so will the Pacific, turning into one large stretch of water. Instead of the 7 continents we know today, we'll get a new supercontinent, which he called Arica, because it would have Australia and the Americas at its heart. Now, it's not the only possible scenario, though. Novo Pangea might be another, and it's easy to foresee. The Atlantic stays open and the Pacific closes. Then there's Amasia. For this one, you'd have to imagine the Arctic Ocean closing and the Atlantic and Pacific staying open. Everything shifts to the north around the North Pole, except Antarctica. One final scenario would be called Pangea Ultima. Slow down the spreading in the Atlantic, and a new subduction plate pops up on the America's east coast. Well, either way, if all the continents collide in the future once more, some say it won't be fun to experience. It's believed that in around 250 million years, we'll feel like we're being trapped in a sweltering, soggy plastic bag. Weirdly, that bag will be the best place to live on Earth, the coastal areas. As for the inland spots, they'll be sizzling, like a desert on fire. Many of the species of animals we know today might not make it. As for us humans, we'll need to be creative if we want to withstand the heat. We should be thankful, though. These digital models are still great because we can use them to test all sorts of interesting ideas. For example, how these supercontinents would mess with tides. Taking future space travels into consideration, these models can help us understand the climates of exoplanets too. Those are located outside our solar system. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a